Hello there, and welcome to this damn fool idealistic crusade. This latest in my series of Laserdisc collection updates is an interesting one. It's actually all of these discs are, I guess, from a particular collection that was traded into our local major used bookstore. It's a used bookstore, but it practically counts as everything else since they stock just about every form of media known to man, because it just happens to come through there. But they every once in a while have laser discs, and so for the past few weeks, a massive collection has been traded in, and so I picked up all of these discs at the same location, and almost all of them for the same insanely low price of 95 cents, which is what they usually price most LDs at. So this is McKay's Used Books in Nashville, and like I said, they normally have just a handful of LDs, and myself and a few other local collectors kind of pick over the same ones. They generally price stuff at 95 cents, or sometimes rarely a quarter, just to move it out to the handful of us who are going to find the little cubby hole of LDs. Every once in a while, there's a 295 title of something that's a little bit more well known. Criterions are usually priced at 595, which is all right for certain Criterions, but you wish you could get them for under $1 too. And then if it's a Disney title, it's automatically $7 because it's Disney. Not necessarily if it's a worthwhile title or not, or just another common disc, but it's been really interesting the past few weeks what's turned up. It was a really stunning collection. I missed out on some titles because other people got there before I did and saved me from myself for sure. But I picked up a ton of 95-cent discs, and not necessarily all of them are very rare, but the vast majority of them are titles you do not see all the time. Some late releases, some really, really interesting catalog titles that are definitely usually going for a lot more than 95 cents. The real standouts, besides the late releases, found some nice Criterion discs I've been looking for a while. Found several DTS titles, and one in particular I was stunned to find. It's a title I've wanted to get for many, many years. And then nice box set, and some of the really hard to find late release MGM AC3 titles, which was really cool. I think sometimes people just price things and they don't know what they have, particularly since they look almost identical to the super common version. And in addition to that, some really nice mid to late 90s Warner letterbox reissues. So it's a really interesting, just massive grab bag of titles, and I had to go several times because they would just keep stocking stuff out, because apparently this seller was just bringing in a box or two at a time. So what was once one small cubbyhole of LDs turned into 5 or 6 shelves floor to ceiling, which was just amazing. But it's pretty much dwindled off, and I think all of us collectors have kind of picked through most of it now, and unfortunately, it seems like they might have caught on to us, and so they started pricing some discs higher. But still, some amazing finds, and you never know what will turn up in that place. In some ways, it's like a black hole, because I'm astonished what comes in for trade in this area. Sometimes that turns up there, and I'm like, how in the heck did this get here? I figured I was the only person in this state that knew what this was. So yeah, it's been really interesting. If you're ever in the area, McKay's has several stores in the Tennessee and southern region, but it's a really interesting place. Primarily, you should go there for their book section, which is massive. Tons and tons and tons of phenomenal deals and bargain outlet, well, even beyond bargain outlet pricing for books. But they have a rather substantial DVD and a section, gaming section, all kinds of stuff. But their LDs are usually, you got to hunt for them. They used to move around. It was always in a small cubby hole when I finally found it. And so I just checked it every time I passed through there, every month or two. Same thing with the other local stores, and what I'm sure all LD collectors do. We always check the little cardboard box or milk crate under a shelf somewhere in a record store. It's like the same 3 dog-eared discs we've looked at for a couple of years, just passing on because we don't need it, but we always check what's in the local store. But every once in a while, you see a collection come in, and it's like Christmas morning, and this one was just unbelievable. It seemed like every time I went in there, when I thought it was over, there was a few more, and then like a week later, it was a whole new flood of discs at 95 cents. So This is going to be a very long video because there's just so many titles for me to go through, and I already had to separate out the other discs I was getting in. So I've got a second video coming with just the other ones that I was already planning on. It's also kind of funny because some of the discs I bought from some group sellers, I then found at McKay's for 95 cents. And I'm like, why did I buy that? Because it's here for $1. So that was kind of amusing in a way. And then actually saw some discs I missed out on pop up at McKay's. So some of the ones that Culture Dog just got, and his latest update video I actually found at McKay's for 95 cents. So I thought that was kind of funny too. But a lot of titles I've wanted to get for a long time. A lot of stuff off my wish list. A lot of stuff off my wish list I never thought I would find. So yeah, these are really interesting titles. Practically, there's like maybe one or two commons in there, but it's almost all like really uncommon stuff. Again, some late releases, really hard to find Warner letterbox reissues, stupidly hard to find late release MGM AC3 stuff. So yeah, I think I hope you'll be pleasantly surprised by some of these. If you're aware of any of this any of these segments of LD collecting, you'll know no, these are not commonly found, and particularly not for 95 cents. So admittedly, I did buy quite a bit, but it was at least broken up over several segments, and I always try to trade in some old books when I go in, so I actually paid less than what was the sticker price for a lot of these, simply because I had some trade credit. But yeah, it's been really, really interesting. So I wanted to preface this a bit before I just jump into it. So again, this video will be a little bit on the long side simply because there's so many discs to go through, and then I have to do a second video just going through all the other titles. So without further ado, welcome to this insanely amazing 95-cent McKay's bookstore haul of really great catalog LDs. So there were a couple Criterions mixed in, and these were the only discs that were not 95 cents. So these were a little bit more, but still far under eBay pricing. And with some of the stuff I traded in, I really didn't pay much for them at all. So these were all priced at $5.95, and this one in particular, spine number 143, obviously Dr. Strangelove, is one I've wanted to get for a long time because it's one of my favorite films of all time, and I wanted to get the Criterion Laserdisc version to compare to the Columbia or Sony letterbox version that I've had for a number of years. This is where the alternating ratio started on home video for the film, which still confuses a lot of people, but was Kubrick's preferred way of showing the film on 4:3 analog video formats of the time. But the reason why I wanted to pick this up and why I haven't already is I wanted to find a first pressing that still had the early script draft version in the extras. This was not something that I guess Kubrick or other people kind of wanted to get out there, or just didn't like its inclusion, so Criterion had to pull the release and reissue it. And the only way you can tell the difference is you have to actually look at the mint marks on the actual disc itself. And if you look at the LDDB page for the film, you can see which mint marks you want to look for. Pretty much the disc is the same on either pressing, from what I understand. It is a CAV transfer, same gatefold, same art. But the only difference is the extras are slightly different because it removes that section of the script. Sometimes they seem to have used the same jacket, so it might say that it includes it, but it doesn't. So you have to actually look at the discs themselves, identify the mint marks. So here, for an interesting cover for the film, it's got the actual bomb testing imagery that looks really amazing on an LD jacket and very striking, very bold. But of course is not the original poster art or any images from the film like you get on the Sony LD. Get the Criterion banner in black across the top, and then this wonderful gatefold, which is done in black and white with the Criterion SA running in the gatefold. And the production credits are tucked in there. And then very nicely, Criterion went with a alternating white background with a nice section of the original poster artwork there. As I mentioned before, this was the brand new transfer made with the alternating 1:3:3 and 1:6:6 aspect ratios. The film is pretty much 1:6:6 and was designed for it to be shown in widescreen exhibitions in 1964, but Early video versions were opened up to 1:3:3, kind of cropping some of the sides. Kubrick liked both ratios for different shots, so that's where the notion of alternating between them came from. And that was repeated on the Criterion release of Lolita, which remains exclusive to that Laserdisc. This alternating ratio carried over to the Sony release because they seemingly reused the Criterion master, and then the first two DVDs carried that as well before they switched over with the new restoration. The first one was in 2004, and that switched to a flat 166 version. So that's another reason why this is important. And then if you have the first pressing, as I have here, it has an early version of the script, an early script draft that was removed from later releases. There's also a nice supplemental section about all of the various atomic bomb preparations, including the infamous duck and cover short, and a lot of background information. So it gives you it's a nice time capsule of sorts. So it is a well put together, as typical for Criterion at this time, a well put together extra section for one of the important films of not just that decade, but pretty much of all time. And so I'm really happy to finally have this. Like I said before, I wanted to wait to find a good copy at a nice price, because usually this goes for at least $10 to $15, if not $20 on eBay. But it's very difficult to ascertain from a seller if it's the first pressing or the second pressing, because you actually have to check the mint marks on the inner ring of the disc. So if you're interested in that, be sure and check copies you come across. Next up, we have Spine number 170, which is Green for Danger. This is a really interesting British film. It's sort of a cross between it's immediate post-war period, so it is pretty much sort of got the feel of a wartime drama, but it's technically more of a whodunit mystery. So it's like a weird mix between the two. I've only seen it once before. I think it may have been on TCM when I was growing up, because I remember things from it, but I can't remember how the actual plot goes. So it'll be interesting to revisit on this Criterion release. And if you look at the actual jacket, it's a nice black and white image, but the actual sides are kind of tinted green, almost like it's an iris of green closing in on the characters, which I thought was a very cute touch. And then the title is very stylized. The rear is really nice. This is, of course, later on when Criterion started making their fancier jackets, just like what we saw on Dr. Strangelove a second ago. There's no extras on this because it's a CLV release, but it does have a wonderful commentary by Bruce Eder, who's one of my favorite, film historians who did commentary tracks a lot back in the day. A number of Criterion tracks that he did are among my all-time favorites, like his track for Cat People and The Great Escape as well. So that's going to be really fun to give a listen to. But again, I haven't seen this film in ages. It does have PCM mono for the digital tracks, and then Analog Track 1 has an analog mono as well. Of course, the commentary is on Analog Track 2. No special features section again because it's just a single CLV disc, but it is cool that we get the Bruce Eder commentary. Next up is Spine number 318. This is the Criterion release of The League of Gentlemen, which is actually a film I've heard of, read about, but never gotten the chance to see. And this is much later on in Criterion on Laserdisc. I believe this disc is from 1997, so we're getting close to the end of the format. As you can see, we have the last iteration of the Criterion banner. This is what would carry over to DVD. And of course, by this time, most of these Laserdisc would be put out on DVD pretty early in the Criterion's run on DVD. Also, they have these really nice, it's not just glossy on the it's not just a glossy jacket, but it's like a very thick, high gloss, which I don't know how well that's going to come across here, but it really feels nice in the hand. So that's another way you can tell this is a much later Criterion outside of the spine number. Then to flip over on the rear, again, this one is not a special edition. It's just a single CLV title. They did do a new transfer of this film, which is in the transfer notes, so it should be much improved over any previous video version that was available before this time. And it does have a mono mix digitally encoded. Get the typical Criterion essay, but in a much fancier and nicer printing on this rear jacket. It looks very, very fancy, and it is, because this, of course, was Criterion once they had really not just learned the game of Laserdisc jackets, but basically kind of perfected the Laserdisc edition. Here we have Spine 321. This is Big Deal on Madonna Street. This is another title I've never seen, and will very gladly watch on this release. Again, it's a later Criterion release from 1997 as well. And you also have, again, the modern banner and this really thick gloss on the jacket, which is a very striking image. I believe this also came out on DVD, and they just used the same cover art, but it would look much more impressive on this Laserdisc jacket. Again, by this point in time, I think Criterion had finally nailed the artistic designs they wanted to do, even with the standard releases. So you can see the rear uses every advantage of the 12-inch jacket. Again, this is not a special edition. It just is a standard CLV disc with a mono soundtrack. But it's just really striking how far Criterion came, and just, not all that long, but they were still, by this point, kind of leading the pack for home video distributors. There's no commentary here, but the actual essay here is actually written by Bruce Eater. So he did a lot of not just commentaries, but essays as well. So should be fun to enjoy this film for the first time on this release. Now, that does it for the Criterion titles. Next up are a few DTS discs, and astonishingly, like the vast majority of all these other discs, these were also only 95 cents, which I was quite flabbergasted. I've found a number of DTS titles in the wild, as it were, for rather cheap, which was quite surprising, but never minty copies, particularly this next one, which is one I've always wanted to find, which is definitely usually sells for far more than 95 cents. And that is, of course, the DTS edition of 1994's True Lies, directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And what's interesting about this release, while the standard version is very common, and along with Clear and Present Danger was the first AC3 title, and is still a great disc, unfortunately, it's got some edge enhancement and some DNR going on, so the transfer is not, like top-tier Laserdisc. But when they made the DVD, which is the last release there's been, because there's still no Blu-ray for this or The Abyss, they used the AC3 master, so that's a non-anamorphic copy of the AC3 Laserdisc with all the DNR and edge enhancement and stuff. So it's kind of baked in, and you just kind of have to live with it. But I've been told, and I've read, and I've heard that this is supposed to use a newer picture master without those issues. So it's supposed to have a better picture, but also have an improved soundtrack because it used some sort of higher generation soundtrack master. I think the AC3 version used a 16-bit master, whereas this one's supposed to use an 18-bit master. And I'm really a sucker for any DTS Laserdisc because everyone I've encountered has been just a sonic joy. Even if it's just, the same as the AC3 version, but it's just so much more powerful, it's not even funny. So, like most DTS titles, these would come out 97, 98, so you get the benefit of it being a much later pressing, and the jacket will be a little bit different, even though the art is the same, because it's been printed usually by Kuroe, I never know how to say that exactly right. Whereas original copies were most likely Pioneer, Mitsubishi, stuff like that. So if you put them side by side, you'll notice the jacket's usually a little bit different in terms of how it was made. And of course, you get the DTS banner on the top and bottom. But everything else is identical. You get the same gatefold with the same text and everything. This jacket is glossy, whereas I'm pretty sure the AC3 original one is not, but it's identical on the inside. Like I said, this copy is in really mint shape, and usually these go for, at least $30, but they can go up to about $80 or so. So finding one of these for 95 cents was, that one of those, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming about Laserdisc again? As you can tell, the jacket's a little thinner, so it wants to kind of bow out a little bit, so I'm trying to slide the sleeves out so it won't do that so badly. So yes, if you know the AC3 version, this is the same rear cover, but again, the jacket is glossy, the actual manufacturing is a little different, but you do have the DTS moniker here and here, which are the only main differences. So I'm going to fire this up as soon as humanly possible because I'm dying to check this out. I enjoy this film every once in a while. It was one of those that really kind of escaped me growing up. Like, I knew about it, I saw pieces of it, and of course, as a spy nerd, anything that has to do with spies whatsoever, even a film like this that's much more on the cartoony side of things, I have to check out. And of course, this was designed The production was designed by Peter Lamont, who went on to do Titanic, which is where he finally won his Oscar when he really deserved it for many years on all his work on the James Bond series. So you have actual James Bond alumni working on True Lies in several different places. So that's another reason why I enjoy this film. But I'm really curious to check out this disc and the transfer, and particularly the soundtrack, because the AC3 version already had a phenomenal soundtrack. So if you ever stumble across one of these, just please do pick it up, because from what all my research and what everybody tells me, this is probably the best version of the film officially available outside of the D Theater version, because I do believe it made it to D Theater, which was the short-lived HD VHS format that was a 1080i with, again, a form of AC3. So soundtrack-wise, this is still the premiere version, but there is that one HD version floating around out there. And very surprisingly, there were more DTS titles for 95 cents, so the party did not stop. So here is the DTS release of Conair, which is one of those really fun action films from the 90s that you kind of forget about, or at least I do. I haven't seen this. I remember we rented it. I didn't see it in the theater growing up, but I've seen it a number of times on cable since, but I haven't watched it. I haven't actually owned a copy. So this is the first copy I've ever owned, and it's the DTS version. The standard one is a lot more common. This one is... it's not one of the ultra rare DTS titles, but doesn't pop up as much as the certain ones you see all the time. So, but anytime I see the DTS logo somewhere, it's like, it's mine. Please, I must have them all. Even if it's a film I don't like, I must have them. But anyway, you get the poster art. Again, the jacket is nice and glossy, as a lot of these DTS releases are. I'm pretty sure this is going to use the same picture master. And what's also funny is it keeps the Dolby Surround and digital sound and stereo monikers, because again, this is a Disney disc because it's Touchstone, so you get the Disney stereo moniker. Those would have been on the standard jacket, and since DTS takes over the digital tracks, it's kind of funny they kept those there. Usually they would remove those. But I think what that might refer to is that they let the analog tracks alone. So the analog tracks are still, stereo and Dolby Surround encoded. So they just left all this on. But, if you weren't paying attention, they didn't have the big DTS bar across the top. It's like they just reused the AC3 jacket. Again, the rear is the same as the AC3 version from what I've seen. It's just a standard CLV disc, two sides, no extras or anything. But I always thought it was kind of cool how they have the logo of the film here at the end of the chapters. And then also here they've put the warning about DTS, so it's very clear if you buy this and you didn't have a DTS capable device or decoder at the time, you weren't going to get any sound unless you played the analog tracks. And that's on you because you bought a DTS disc. And that's why they put a warning on it. So, of course, I know a lot of people did that back in the day. Even on DVD, they would accidentally buy the DTS version where there was no alternate soundtrack, and then they'd freak out because their movie had no sound. But anyway, I'll be really excited to revisit this, check out the transfer, but especially another DTS title. I'm always happy to find one of these. They are very uncommon, and their prices generally keep climbing on eBay as years go by. So I would like to have more of them, but it's just finding them and finding them at a decent price. And it is very rare that stuff like this happens, but when it does, it's like Christmas morning. And because I wasn't having enough fun, there is one more. This is the DTS release of Last Man Standing, which is the Walter Hill picture and is most well known for being technically the third version of the Yojimbo story. So basically this is a Depression era set gangster film that basically retells the lone gunman going into a town with two rival crime families and playing them off at each other. As we saw in Yojimbo, set in Japan in the past, and then re-envisioned as A Fistful of Dollars by Sergio Leone in 1964, and then this film in the 90s. I've seen this once or twice before. It does have a pretty loud in places soundtrack. I didn't think it was like a truly stupendous soundtrack when I watched it before a number of years ago. Because before I'd seen it growing up on TV, but I'd never seen it, home theater wise until I watched it on I believe I watched it on Blu-ray, which does have a lossless soundtrack, so it sounded pretty good. But I'll be interested to revisit it and see if I think better of it, because I know when I first saw it, and then the second time I was like, yeah, this isn't as good as I remembered. But I'm always willing to give something a chance again, and especially on a DTS pressing, because again, these are very, very, very uncommon. And again, this should be the same as the AC3 jacket, except for you have the DTS information up here telling you don't buy this if you don't have DTS, otherwise you're just going to be stuck with the analog tracks. And because this is New Line, that means it's Warner's, and at this point in time, Warner Brothers had handed everything over to Image, which is why this is pressed by Image Entertainment. Next up is the lone box set I picked up. This one was obviously not 95 cents, but they just charged that much for each film, so it was $2.95. And this is quite a rare box set. It's definitely later on in the MGM UA catalog. So this is the Charles Bronson triple feature, but it's basically 3 westerns he did that are under the United Artists banner. So UA put this together, MGM put it out, and they're all letterbox transfers. It's got this nice box, but there's no insert or anything. I don't know if originally there was an insert and it's just not with this copy, but all the relevant information is here on the back. So I'm thinking this probably didn't have an insert because they put all the chapter stops here on the back. And there's no extra features or anything. So I think this was just designed for Bronson fans and to get these films out in widescreen. They all have their original trailers at the end of each side, and of course each film runs into each other. But it seems like they're spread out pretty well. So all 3 films take up 6 sides, so there's no wasted sides anywhere. And again, all 3 are letterbox. The other reason why I was interested to check this out, not is it just a later release and very uncommon, and you definitely don't stumble across it for $3. But the first film included was directed by Michael Winner, who, of course, directed Bronson and Death Wish. And the third was directed by J. Lee Thompson, who I think is a really underrated director. He directed Guns of Navarone and the original Cape Fear, and what I most knew him for growing up, the final 2 Planet of the Apes films, which are very underrated, particularly Conquest, which I think is one of the great underrated sci-fi films and probably the second best of all of the original POTA series. So he's a director whose work I've always enjoyed. So I'll be interested to check these out. I've been trying to dig more into Charles Bronson's back catalog. I think most people just kind of like and enjoy watching the cheesier stuff, all the later Death Wish sequels and the stuff from the 80s and 90s, which I can understand that. But I think there's some real hidden gems of all the films he kind of cranked out in the late 60s, early to mid 70s. And again, not all what you would think. So he did some westerns, of course, post Once Upon a Time in the West, and he did a lot of crime thrillers and with some interesting directors. He worked with both Peter Hunt and Terrence Young, so again, Bond connections galore as well. So it'll be interesting to check out these transfers. They do all have their original mono tracks, PCM of course, and so yeah, it should be fun. And again, definitely not something you stumble across in the bookstore used bin. This next one is a release I've wanted for a very long time, since practically I got into Laserdisc. This is the double feature set of the French Connection and French Connection 2. Obviously from Fox Video. This is a later pressing from the 90s, and you don't stumble across it all that often, I think, because it's from a little bit later, and it's just not as common as, the more obvious titles that they seem to print. They seem to have printed a lot of in like 91, 92. Of course, you have the modern Fox Video logo in color down there. Digital sound. This was the first major letterbox release for both films. And it was really cool that they put French Connection 2 in here, because usually that just kind of gets left out by itself. They did release a DVD box set when French Connection came out that included French Connection 2. I missed out on that one, so I had to wait years until they reissued French Connection 2. And then on Blu-ray, they were separate again as well. So there were only 2 times they packaged them together, this and that DVD set. I like the cover art. It's sort of this broken mirror design where they have images from both films. It's really nice, and the actual jacket has some glossiness to it, so it's a fancier release than what Fox generally did, so I do appreciate that. Then The gatefold is really cool. You get a whole panel for each film with a complete essay and write-up, and then your chapter stops. So again, really, really nice, and definitely several cuts above your usual Fox output, because French Connection alone is one of the top-tier signature Fox titles. Of course, it is the Best Picture winner of 1971, which is definitely saying a lot, because 1971 is one of the most loaded with greatness years in all of cinema history. But then the fact that they made this extra special by including the sequel that most people just kind of overlook, I really appreciated. And you get this nice "From New York to Marseille" tagline. Here's the panel for French Connection 2. Again, both of these discs are single disc CLV titles, so two-sided, and I don't think they have the trailers, so I think the extras are the nice package, attention to detail, and these nice essay pieces. The main reason why I wanted to always pick this version up is I had hoped that the French Connection had its original mono mix, which was pretty much unavailable on home video for a number of years. And unfortunately, this listed as being a stereo, so it's probably the Dolby Surround stereo remix that's just been floating around since, I guess sometime in the 80s, maybe for a reissue or something. But the mono did finally come out when they reissued the Blu-ray with the proper corrected transfer. So the Director's Signature Series French Connection Blu-ray that every collection should have. If you scroll through the audio options, the original mono is there. It's just a lossy track, but it sounds great. It's very noisy, very gritty, as the film should be, and you can finally watch the film and not have to listen to a stereo remix, which to me always kind of took away something from it, because this is such one of the great, gritty, intrinsically New York of the early 70s films that, again, the notion of a stereo remix really just kind of messes with that. However, French Connection 2 seems to have its mono because it doesn't have a stereo credit, and that film really didn't get remixed until DVD and Blu-ray. You can also grab the Blu-ray of French Connection 2 really cheap, and since Fox titles seem to be on moratorium since the Disney buyout, it's definitely a better idea to grab them while you still can, because I've already seen French Connection 2 is starting to disappear. And if you pick up this Laserdisc set, it's a nice set, but again, you just don't come across it all the time. So I was very happy to finally pick this up, and I will spin this up to check out the transfers, because I've been wondering about them for many years now. Only problem with these double feature sets is it kind of interferes with my usual shelving, because that's both of those would have gone on my director's shelf, and so would this one. But of course, I've just put all of these double feature sets together. This is another one you don't see all the time. This is a 1996 Universal release. It's a double feature of Madigan with the really underrated Charlie Varick, which was directed by Don Siegel after he did Dirty Harry. Charlie Varick is starting to kind of get rediscovered because it's been put out on Blu-ray by Kino, and it's finally gotten a new restoration and looks really nice, but this was the first proper release and on video, because it's actually letterbox, and it's paired with an underrated 60s crime thriller, which is Madigan, where you have Henry Fonda and Richard Widmark, and it's a cop thriller. It's a bit on the darker side because it is in the late 60s, but it's not quite fully there yet. You're not at French Connection, Dirty Harry quite yet, but you can see it's starting to get into that territory. So it is darker than, say, a cop film would have been in perhaps the early 60s. But it's been a little while since I've seen Madigan, so it'll be interesting to check it out again on this Laserdisc release. And really amazing gatefold. I am shocked this is a Universal release, because usually their stuff is pretty standard, but this is a phenomenal gatefold, fully stylized, with your chapters nicely put down here. You get a nice essay write-up. I've seen this be the case with a number of these mid-90s Universal double feature sets. They were really stepping up their game. Stuff like the double feature of the Jimmy Stewart, Anthony Mann westerns, the Doris Day, Rock Hudson set I just found about a month or two ago, and then some of the later double feature sets of the classic Universal monster sequels from the 1940s. But this is a phenomenal gatefold, easily one of the best I've ever seen from Universal. Really stylized. Again, you could have used this as like the front cover art, and I think that would have sold more LD copies back in the day, because it's much more grabbing than what is obviously what they used for the VHS tapes. It looks so much more generic. And then the rear also has the awesome visuals from the gatefold. Again, both are letterbox, both have their original mono soundtracks digitally encoded. No extras or anything, but I do believe they both have their trailers. Let me make sure. Yes, they each have a trailer at the end, so that's cool. Again, really nice release. You don't come across it all the time, but definitely pick it up if you do stumble across it, because this was the point where Universal was really trying to turn it around and make, and they did make awesome Laserdisc by, 94, 95, 96. Now, a couple sequels and films from various series. So I have the standard letterbox of the original film, but I never had the release of Jewel of the Nile, which of course is from Fox. This came out much later on. The original disc came out in the 80s. This one came out in, I believe, 1995. Uses the gorgeous original art. It's got a nice glossy sleeve. It's a little dinged up, a little corner crumpling, but I can't complain for 95 cents. So I'll check this out. I'm sure the transfer will be a lot better because, of course, it's a much newer disc. The rear looks pretty nice. I like the sort of light beige that makes it look like old parchment or something. Again, giving you more of the Indiana Jones vibes they were shooting for. I know this film isn't as regarded as the original. It's definitely not as good, but I rewatch these every once in a while, and I have the set on DVD that has both of them. But I always wondered what this looked like on LD, so now I'll get to check that out. And of course, it does have the original Dolby Surround encoded stereo soundtrack on the digital track. So this should be a fun spin. And again, Fox Discs, by this point in time, pretty much everybody was doing great work, and Fox was right up there with them. So it'll be fun to check this out and compare it to the DVD. Next up is one of the classic Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce Sherlock Holmes series. These were all released primarily by Landmark Laservision and Republic Home Video on LD. Unfortunately, I was only able to pick up one. Again, they were just putting out random discs, so I'm sure there were probably some others that I missed out on. But this is Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon from 1942, and it has some art here, and then these jackets were all done to match. So if you look for all of these, the jackets all look pretty much the same, so they kind of go together, but it's kind of very easy to mix them up because the jackets are so similar. So you have the Republic logo in the bottom corner. These are digitally encoded for the audio, so they do have PCM mono tracks, even though it doesn't really indicate that on the jacket. I never intended to pick these up on LD because you have to buy them all individually, and you'd have to track all of them down, and the early Fox ones as well. And I really want to get the restored versions on Blu-ray, but those are, I believe they're from MPI, and they're very expensive. So I was going to look at importing them because the import versions are a little cheaper, but now I've bought one on Laserdisc, so now I want all the rest on Laserdisc too. But it should be fun to check these out on LD because I'm sure I always get a thrill out of watching the unrestored versions and enjoying the PCM soundtracks and with all the hiss and crackle and things like that. And sometimes I get a pleasant surprise with a really great transfer that just feels very organic because, it's from a really clean element and it was just done really well. So I like being able to see the best of the best technology-wise from back in the day. So this is a nice little release, and hopefully I can pick up some of the others if I stumble across them. Now on to the director's shelves, and this is kind of what I was talking about, because I've already mentioned titles that some of these guys have already done in the double feature sets. So this is an oddball one. This is the film Blue Chips from 1994. This was actually directed by William Friedkin, and while it's a sports film, I just never realized it's a sports film, so I've never actually seen this. So cheap LD. It's directed by Billy Friedkin. This is the widescreen version. It's very easy to accidentally pick up the pan and scan one from Paramount with Dolby Stereo surround encoding on the digital tracks. Just a standard CLV disc. Not super common, but you see it pop up. I just never put two and two together, so anything Friedkin did, I will check out. And even though I'm not really one for sports films, so it was just super cheap, and it's the widescreen version, so I figured why not. This is one I've tried to get for a long, long time. Now, of course, there's the wonderful Criterion Blu-ray, but for a long time, this was one of the most underrated films of the early 70s. This, of course, is the Alan J. Pakula picture, Klute. which is sort of the first of what's known as his Paranoia trilogy, which is very, loosely grouped together by a lot of critics. But it's this film followed by The Parallax View, which is supremely underrated, and then, of course, All the President's Men. But this is a really, really phenomenal thriller from the era. Very, very different, very, very edgy, and I love the cover art here. The Criterion Blu-ray has great art. The DVD has great art, which basically uses this, but it looks phenomenal on an LD jacket. This is, again, Warner Brothers stepping up their game. It's not super garish or anything, using original art. And then the rear does not have the usual black background with the weird garish color in the photos. So this is from later on in the 90s. You don't stumble across it a lot because a lot of the discs Warner made from this era, they just didn't print a whole lot of. It does include the original trailer, and I'm pretty sure this is the transfer they reused for the DVD, which was pretty early on, was in a snapper case. But yes, this is a phenomenal film to return to, one of the great thrillers of the time period, and I'm just really happy to finally have it on LD. Of course, it does have the original mono soundtrack on the digital tracks, and it should be a really nice pressing because this is Warner Brothers from the mid to late 90s, where pretty much everybody was making great LDs. I've seen this on DVD, of course, seen the Criterion Blu-ray, but it'll be fun to finally be able to check this out on the Laserdisc version, because this is just one that's eluded me for a long time, and it was one of those I pulled off the shelf in this 95-cent madness rush and was just like, yes, finally. Speaking of that, this is another one that's eluded me for a long time, very uncommon, and was astonished this was in there as well. So whoever had these originally was definitely someone after my own heart. So this is for my Peck Paw shelf. This is the MGM UA Deluxe Letterbox reissue of The Killer Elite from 1975. And this was a big improvement over the previous pan and scan discs, and they reused this for the DVDs. Of course, Twilight Time did a Blu-ray, and that's out of print, and I stupidly missed out on it. So unfortunately, I don't have it on Blu-ray. I do like that they use forms of the original art here, and I like that the background is black. Get this nice glossy jacket with the MGM letterbox banner across the top. But because it's no gatefold, it's got some crinkling, which is just gonna happen with this style of packaging. This pressing is from 97, so it should be really nice looking. Of course, it's actually pressed by Image. Has the mono on the digital track, and it does include the trailer. It's spread over 3 sides, and I believe, side 3 is CAV, so it should be fun to revisit this on this particular pressing. And again, I'm pretty sure the DVD reused the same transfer because that was a very early DVD, pretty much no frills, and kind of looks like a Laserdisc transfer, so I'm sure that's what this is, but it should be fun to visit it on this particular version. I'm just very happy to finally have this because it's always eluded me. It's usually like a $10 to $15 disc, and you don't come across them very often. So next up we have for Arthur Penn the letterbox edition of the Missouri Breaks, which is a very interesting. Basically, you could consider it a revisionist Western for sure. This is just a gorgeous jacket with some nice glossiness on the sleeve, original poster artwork, and of course a letterbox edition banner across the top. This one is very uncommonly found, so I was very excited to see it. It's a MGM UA release pressed by Image. It's pretty late in the game. I believe it's 96 or 97. It is, of course, available on DVD, and then I believe Kino was the one who did it on Blu-ray, but getting this LD is very, very uncommon, and it's a nice pressing with great art, and again, it's from about 96, I believe, and so you get side 3 is CAV encoded, you get the theatrical trailer, and then as a nice bonus, you get the isolated music and effects track on the analog tracks, in addition to the PCM mono. So this is an interesting film. I'll be happy to revisit it, and particularly to check out this LD pressing. Next up is another title that should technically be on a director's shelf. My problem is there's so many directors that I admire and follow that I kind of have a hard time figuring out where to file things. So I don't know if I might just start filing stuff by year and just to make it easier because I have so many different categorizations. But this one could easily go under the William Wellman section. So, of course, the Encore Edition release of Beau Guest, one of the great classic adventure films, starring Gary Cooper. And, of course, this and a number of the Universal Hal Cooper films have been restored recently in 4K and released on Blu-ray by Kino Lorber. And while I'd love to pick those up, you definitely don't stumble across 95-cent minty copies of Encore Edition discs like this in beautiful shape. I love the jacket, even though it's in the standard Encore jacket style. This is definitely one of my favorite Encore jackets that I've ever seen. It just looks really great, and I like the color they used. It's a really impressive jacket for them for this time period, which is saying something. Of course, it does have a digital mono. This was by the point in time where they finally decided to start adding digital soundtracks, and it does actually include the theatrical trailer, which is nice because Universal didn't really do that all that often. So this was a really nice find, super minty, and again, one of the great classic adventure films if you haven't seen it. This is one that's always eluded me for some reason. This is the, again, Universal restoration version of the 1943 For Whom the Bell Tolls, of course based on Hemingway. Once again starring Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman, this being the film that she cut her hair short when leaving Casablanca, and directed by Sam Wood. And again, this is one of the major attempts at restoring the film, which is in really rough shape. So this is still a fine way to watch it. There's been a successive reissue, but it's never been 100% painstakingly restored, particularly not in 4K. So the new releases leave something to be desired, which is unfortunate. And so this LD is probably the first decent version we had on home video, and does have the mono soundtrack on the digital tracks, and this nice, attractive gatefold packaging, which again is a cut above the usual Universal packaging, but of course they couldn't resist having a typical Universal bar across the top, but at least it's black. The gatefold is very nice, so they definitely stepped up their game. This is much like the better design on their Encore Edition double features, but I think they gave it better treatment because, of course, this was the restoration of the film, so they gave it a nice write-up with nice production notes information, great photos, great design. The film is spread over four sides, and then side 4 ends with the trailer and then some photos and lobby cards. So I guess that was their attempt to be sort of Criterion-like, but it's not a full-blown extra section. Again, though, it is nice to see that Universal was finally starting to try and turn their laser game around. Rear jacket is lovely, carrying on the design of the front. Again, you get the digital mono, and then you get an analog track, but there's no isolated music or effects or anything. So still a great, important classic film, one of the best, if not the best, adaptation of Hemingway on screen, trying to not change a bunch of stuff, because a lot of the really great ones are films like To Have and Have Not, where they basically just took the title and kind of ran with it. It's always nice to see when producers would try to strive for artistic and literary greatness, even if some may not find it all that rewarding. And again, this is a film that's been restored a number of times over the years, and this was the first truly major restoration attempt. Next up is Young Man with a Horn, a lovely Warner Brothers pressing. This, of course, directed by Michael Curtiz, starring Kirk Douglas, Lauren Bacall, and Doris Day. This was a film that I actually didn't have a copy of, so I was very happy to pick up the LD version. There is a DVD that's in some of the Doris Day sets, but then not in others, so that's why I didn't have it. But it's got this lovely jacket. It's a lot more impressive than your typical Warner Brothers fare for the time period. Then you flip over to the back and you get the usual Warner Brothers jacket. But since this is a black and white film, they kept the silver color and they kept the images in black and white, which makes it look far more impressive. I like this jacket very much. It's one of the better Warner Brothers jackets of this time period. As for the transfer, it's just a single CLV disc, two-sided, PCM mono, nothing fancy. But this is an underrated film, one of the best films that Doris Day is in, really. It's got a lot more of a dramatic punch to it. And, of course, Kirk Douglas is phenomenal, as always. Lauren Bacall is phenomenal. And, of course, practically anything Michael Curtiz touched is has that golden touch to it. So, highly recommended, and a really nice LD from Warner's. Now, this is one you don't see every day. This is the Letterboxd Deluxe Edition of Knights of the Round Table from 1953 from MGM UA. And this is one of the really interesting historical epics that came out, in the time period post Quo Vadis, where throughout the 1950s everything was in full swing. And of course, this came out the same year as The Robe, which is the film that really pushed the genre even further and brought CinemaScope to the masses. So this is one that kind of gets thrown to the wayside because it is, of course, more about Arthurian legend, and it's not set in the times of ancient Rome. I saw a part of it a long time ago, but I've never gotten to see the whole thing, and its availability is not as easy to find as other titles for sure. I do believe this did come out on DVD. I'm sure it's probably the same master as a lot of the films of this era. If they got a DVD release, it's, kind of expensive, or it's locked away in a box set, and it's just the Lasermaster repressed. The jacket's really nice. Of course, it's the same style MGM was using at the time. You have the gold bar on the back. It's just a single disc, but it's very, very well done. I like the imagery they use, the color, and of course it's letterbox. It has digital sound, and it's actually a Dolby Surround encoded track, because apparently this film did have a full stereo mix for its original engagements. So that should be a fun way to enjoy this. And again, it'll be fun to actually finally get to see this all the way through. And of course, we have the standard Fox release of the aforementioned The Robe. This is, again, the film that I think really kind of gave a shot in the arm to the whole historical sword and sandal epic genre that was one of the dominant genres and most popular things in the 1950s. And, of course, Quo Vadis really got the ball rolling, but The Robe is really what I think capitalized on it. And, again, this being the first major CinemaScope release, bringing a widescreen new standard to even standard theaters and outlying areas if they bought into the Fox system. It was, also a major selling point, as they used to say, Cinerama out of one hole, because you didn't have to have the 3 projectors and deeply curved screens of Cinerama to achieve a widescreen image. So, of course, this film's been restored for Blu-ray, which will, vastly overwhelm you with its visual strengths versus this original Laserdisc copy. But this was the first letterbox version of the film available. It's in the standard Fox special widescreen edition jacket. The image they chose is pretty nice, but it doesn't really give you that whole sense of this being an epic. You do get a rather nice gatefold. It's a little nondescript because that's how Fox would do stuff back in the day, but it does look kind of nice, although it is, oddly enough, in black and white. And then the film is spread across 3 sides. You do get a little bit of production notes and cast and crew notes, as Fox did a lot. And then the standard rear, of course, because this film was CinemaScope, it did have a 4-channel left, center, right surround mix, which is replicated here, Dolby Surround encoded PCM. And I'll be interested to check this out. I'm sure it probably doesn't hit the full 2.55 original CinemaScope ratio, because a lot of earlier transfers kind of cropped it down to 2.35, or there's always usually some aspect ratio weirdness going on, especially on older LD transfers. So that and the color probably being a little bit different because they probably just scanned a print source, whatever was the cleanest one they could find. And like you can see on the vintage photos they used, the color is a little bit different to what you see on the film if you've seen the restored Blu-ray. But this is, a nice looking disc presentation, and I'll be interested again to check out the transfer, the soundtrack with the matrixing, and I just always find it interesting to see like the best version of a film the first time it came to home video, which is usually the letterbox Laserdisc version. And as a really nice touch, in addition to the notes, they also put this little bold mark here saying, hey, if you like this film, the quasi-sequel, Demetrius and the Gladiators, is also available from CBS Fox Home Video. It's very funny that they should say that because, of course, here we have the Fox release of Demetrius and the Gladiators. So I think whoever was the original owner of this particular collection was a big buff for 50s historical epics, because there were a number in here, and I was very happy to pick them up, especially minty copies for 95 cents each. That's basically like waving a red flag. I'm going to get it. Interestingly, of course, this film is a little shorter, so you still get a gatefold, but it's just a single disc instead of 2 discs. They use a much bigger image, which looks a lot more dramatic, and I think this came out shortly thereafter. maybe a few months later or something, but the jacket's just a lot more impressive. And opening the gatefold is more impressive. They tucked all the notes on the side, although it's got this maroon sort of background block. But then the image is printed in full color. The sleeve is a little glossy, which helps as well, but the image just really pops off the gatefold. So that's really impressive and very much appreciated. Now, again, this is just a single CLV disc, so they didn't have to do a gatefold, but it's cool that they did. As you can tell, the back gray is a little bit different in tone. A lot of Fox discs, they didn't have the same gray across the board. They kind of vary in darkness and stuff. Typical design, nice images used, and again, you can tell some are probably from like lobby cards or something because the color is a bit different. And in case you missed it, this includes the theatrical trailer for the Robe, so that way it's like cross promotion. So it entices you to pick up the Fox Laserdisc of the Robe as well. Again, this one also has a stereo surround mix, matrix encoded on the digital tracks, which should replicate the original multi-channel mix very well. And I've seen the Robe several times, but I think I've only seen this once, so it'll be interesting to revisit it on LD. And also, again, I get a kick out of looking at these, original widescreen epics and seeing like their first good video transfer with warts and all. Speaking of 50s epics, with this one I could tell the original owner was big into epics. This is one you don't see all the time. It's not as well known, and unfortunately the Blu-ray is long out of print. So this is the Fox release of The Egyptian, the special widescreen edition version. This is from about a year or two later, so again, the jacket printing is improved, uses the bigger image like Demetrius did. It has the Fox Video logo. I believe this disc pressing is from 1991 or 92 or so. So it is a little bit later, which usually indicates that it might be a slightly better pressing or slightly less noisy. And I like the jacket very much. I like the image chosen. This is a really interesting film. I've seen it once or twice, and I wish I'd gotten the Twilight Time Blu-ray with the newer restoration, but unfortunately I didn't. That sold out, and now it fetches crazy prices online, usually well in excess of $200 or more. So I'm very curious. I know this certainly will match the new Blu-ray, but it's definitely one of an LD you don't expect to just turn up for less than $1 and in super minty shape. So this one usually goes for more like $10 or $15 if you find it. It is a longer film, so of course you get 2 discs with a phenomenal gatefold. This abandons the typical Fox design. It has full liner notes and production notes, so this is essentially a full essay about the production and Daryl F. Zanuck's involvement. Again, full custom background with sort of hieroglyphics and an Egyptian theme. So this is easily one of the best gatefolds I've ever seen from a Fox disc. Like, I was just shocked. Because I'm usually expecting just an image or like a black background, like a lot of the early Fox discs that I've come across. I believe the film is spread over 3 sides, and it does include the theatrical trailer. So, of course, side 4 does nothing. The rear goes with this sort of yellow background. So this is at the point where they started using colors other than gray, which changes it up a little bit. Like the previous 2, it does have a stereo surround matrix encoded digital track because this film would have been released originally with a 4-channel mix. So that should replicate it very well. Basically, overall, you can just see a step up across the board in terms of Laserdisc manufacturing, packaging, everything, comparing this directly to the previous 2 discs I just went over. I wish this film wasn't out of print. I really would love to see the restoration, but seeing as I haven't seen it in a while, I think it'll be cool to check it out on this Laserdisc. I think it'll be cool to check it out on this Laserdisc pressing because, again, I get a real kick out of seeing if they could pull it off back in the day. And sometimes on certain discs, they really did, and they're hugely impressive, such as the letterboxed editions of Ben-Hur, the 1959 remake, are really impressive, even though they obviously can't match the modern Blu-ray restoration. So this is an interesting film. I think it is underrated. And again, anything that Mike Curtiz directed is worth your time for sure. Next up, from 1956 is the MGM letterbox release of High Society, which is essentially the musical remake of the Philadelphia story. And it's kind of hard to compare the two because the Philadelphia story is just one of those immortal, iconic, classic films that obviously a remake, particularly this, can't possibly live up to it 100%. But it has a charm of its own. It's got a different atmosphere, and I've seen it a few times, and finding a minty LD copy, especially. I'm such a big fan of MGM Laserdisc that I can't pass them up, especially if they're less than $1. So I will revisit this and see if it plays any better. And what's interesting about this, it's letterboxed, of course, but apparently MGM went to a lot of effort to restore all the stereo music. So this has a digital soundtrack that's actually stereo. So there's a whole blurb here about how they had to spend a lot of time trying to restore the stereo music stems. So I don't know if this film was actually released in stereo. It may have just been mono, and MGM went to the trouble of trying to just add the stereo music everywhere. This was kind of at the point where they started playing around with doing sound remixes and bringing stereo music into things, like they would do that with the opening titles for North by Northwest and Goldfinger, for example. Just replace the opening title music with a full stereo source, and then the rest of the movie's mono, which was kind of weird. It still is kind of weird. I guess more for like audiophile listening pleasure, which again, I get it, but I'm a purist, so it's like I'd much rather have the original mono, because nowadays it's hard enough just to get the original mono, period. Eventually, by the time of the Thunderball box set, they got to the point where they did a full Prologic surround remix of a mono track and just slipped in all the stereo music. So I'm thinking this is probably like the first inkling of that, but again, I'm not for sure, but it is an interesting note, and that's why this whole blurb is here. So it's just a single CLV disc. It does include the original trailer, and again, it'll be nice to fire this up and check the film out again. The cast is great. It's just hard when you're remaking something that's just truly iconic. This was a nice surprise find. This is the deluxe letterbox reissue of Judgment at Nuremberg. Most often you find the earlier 133 open matted or slightly pan and scanned version. This is one of those films, some people kind of react against it because it's trying to be ultra serious and it does have a long runtime, and it's definitely one of those films that's obviously important because it's trying to be important. But that aside, it is a really impressive achievement for 1961, and especially with the caliber of actors and actresses on with talent on display, I think it's definitely worth your time. But again, the subject matter is very heavy. It's not going to be technically for everybody, and again, the longer runtime doesn't really help it achieve very popular results. But it's very much harder to find this letterbox reissue. It's MGM UA. It was from a couple years later, and you can tell them apart because the original has the poster art design with the blue and white faces, whereas this has full color headshots of some of the main stars. And you get this nice deluxe gatefold, very lovingly done. Not too mad about the color choices though. Like the black is fine, but the kind of yellows and such is kind of weird. But anyway, the film is spread onto 4 sides because again, this does have a pretty significant runtime. It does include the original trailer at the end. So the second panel. So again, MGM was kind of untouched, save for Criterion for having actually great gatefolds by this time period. Then the rear shows that this is a spiffed up edition. It's of course again letterboxed over the earlier one being 133, and of course you get the addition of a digital track, which I think the older one also may have a digital track. I'm not exactly for sure, but of course it's 133 ratio. So really the big benefit here is a slightly spiffed up transfer, getting it properly letterboxed, nicer packaging, spread across 4 sides. And it's just one you don't see very often. So again, I was very shocked to pull this off the shelf, and it was like, yes, this is an instant must buy, because I've almost accidentally bought the original version like a million times. I have to remind myself, no, that one is not letterboxed. Next up from 1962, we have this lovely looking deluxe letterbox edition of the film Geronimo, starring Chuck Connors of the Rifleman fame. It's a really interesting jacket. I've seen it before, and I've never actually seen the film. I think I maybe saw part of it once on television, but I can't remember anything about it really. It's a beautiful looking jacket, so it was a no-brainer for me to pick up. And I also hadn't realized that it's one of the early Adam West film roles, so that's another must-see for me reason. The jacket's a bit more impressive than your standard MGM releases, and the rear jacket looks really, really nice. You have your chapter listings here with a original trailer at the end, and of course just a single CLV disc, PCM mono, and no special features outside of the trailer. I think the jacket's a little fancier because this disc pressing is from 1994, when MGM had really stepped up their game in terms of making spiffier jackets. So really pretty jacket for an interesting looking film that I'm excited to check out. Next up for 1965 is the MGM UA release of The Loved One, which is a very, very bizarre, strange, star-studded black comedy. To give you any indication of what this film is like, the screenplay was co-written by Terry Southern. So if you know anything about Terry Southern, you should know kind of what you're getting into with this film. I've seen it once before, but it's been a long time, so I'm excited to see it again. Warner Archive just did a lovely Blu-ray, but this LD popped up, and it's definitely not a common title. Plus, it uses original art and looks really great. It has this really nice gatefold as well. It's a little corner crumpling up here, but for the dollar price I paid, that's okay. Gatefold is really, really nice with this great cover shot of most of the principal cast, with a lot of other stills across the top. Film spread across 3 sides with the original trailer at the end. The only problem with this release is, unfortunately, it's 133. So it's a, I don't know. I don't think this film was scope. I may be wrong. I think this is just an open up version of the original widescreen edition, but it's unfortunate this film was not presented letterboxed on what is otherwise a really nice, obviously remastered looking copy, and definitely a big advancement over what was available before. I like the rear very much. It's a really nice MGM jacket, who pretty much were unmatched outside of Criterion. Pretty much they were the best of the major studio labels, and definitely got the most number of catalog titles out there, as you can tell by my collection being primarily MGM UA discs. Also from 1965 is the film Operation Crossbow. This is one of the great World War II action films, definitely coming off the back of great successes, particularly The Guns of Navarone. And there is a bit of a James Bond vibe because this is in the midst of the 60s spy craze that was spawned by the first 3 Bond films. Although it is a World War II film, it does kind of have that element. But it's also following in the wake of Guns of Navarone, which also sort of predated Dr. No a little bit. This is a really great adventure film if you've never seen it. One of the great World War II action films. Again, Warner Archive just did it on Blu-ray not too long ago, but I was excited to find the LD version because, again, it's not a very common title, and you get this lovely deluxe letterbox MGM release with some nice cover art. The audio is listed as being stereo, and I thought this film was mono, but I may be wrong, so I'm not sure where that came from. But I will definitely look at the transfer and dig into the audio. Lovely panel gatefold with some nice images. There's a little bit of what looks like maybe sunwear, where some of the color has faded along the top here, but that's all right. For the price I paid, this is otherwise really minty. Nice second panel with the chapter breakdown. And I always liked it when MGM and others would put it all the way across the jacket, because that makes it easier to read, because they would use bigger font and the spacing is easier on the eyes, and it's a lot easier to read than when they would tuck it over in the corner or on the back. It does include the theatrical trailer at the end, but otherwise the film is on 3 sides. I believe side 3 is CAV encoded. Yes, it is. So you get that benefit. MGM was very good about always doing CAV final side if they could, time allotted. So once again, if you've never seen this film and you like films like Guns of Navarone, this is highly recommended. It's probably somewhere in between Guns of Navarone and, say, maybe Where Eagles Dare in terms of the feel of it, but it's definitely a great film. I would love to pick up the Warner Archive Blu-ray, but this will tide me over for the time being. But I'm definitely going to check out the stereo track because, again, I'm curious because I thought this film would have been mono. 1965 was a popular year with this lot. This is the Warner Brothers release of None But the Brave, another World War II film, this time not just starring but also produced and directed by Frank Sinatra. I hadn't realized he directed this as well, but I've never actually seen this, if I'm honest. I do think he was an underrated dramatic actor, particularly, of course, in roles like From Here to Eternity and most especially The Manchurian Candidate. So I'll be interested to finally see this. And again, I just had never realized he actually directed this. The front art is pretty nice, obviously designed for a VHS release. The back, while it does have the Warner Brothers bar, it does have a nice sort of military khaki color to it, the title in green, and then the sidebar in green. So again, keeping with the idea of it suggesting, army fatigues. So I do really appreciate that. And it is a widescreen release. Of course, the widescreen banner's tucked in over here as Warner would do, and there's a little bar basically trying to warn you that black bars are normal, we swear. It does have PCM audio, which I would believe, of course, would be mono since this is 1965, and no extras or anything, just a single CLV disc. This is a title that seemed to pop up. This is a title that seems to pop up in a lot of Laserdisc slots. You see it all the time. I've just never picked up a copy. It just never happened, or I never found a cheap one, or I've wanted to get it before, but this is the 1966 Western Hombre starring Paul Newman, and this is one of those 60s Westerns that really started to fall into what became known as the revisionist Western genre. Most people think it really didn't get popularized until Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Wild Bunch and Once Upon a Time in the West in the late 60s, but I think you can safely make the argument that it really started long before that. There are several Westerns of the 50s that kind of suggest getting towards that. I would say definitely the psychologically driven Westerns of Anthony Mann in the 1950s, but I'd say by the time of Sam Peckinpah coming out with Ride the High Country in 1962, the notion of the revisionist Western was firmly in place, whether people knew this or not. It was not like they were consciously trying to do this. Same thing with film noir. It wasn't anything people were consciously trying to do, but it became recognized as that later on by critics. So this is one of those films that kind of falls into that. It's a Fox widescreen edition, CBS Fox logo. It's relatively early in their widescreen LDs. The jacket's pretty nice, even though it has what is the standard sort of slate gray Fox background cover. And again, I always really liked how they would take a widescreen image and place it in sort of black bars to really, sell the fact this is widescreen. And it has some nice liner notes, as all Fox releases do. Single CLV disc with a monaural PCM soundtrack, no extras or anything. So just getting this film out there in widescreen. And of course, because it's an earlier Fox pressing, it's never going to be as pretty as, say, a disc from the mid-90s once, things had gotten a lot better in terms of the technical specs. But that doesn't mean that these older Fox widescreen discs are, nasty or not worth watching or something, because, you're always still getting a solid transfer, but do expect maybe a little bit of extra noise and stuff because this was, earlier in the game for Fox doing widescreen titles. Also from 1966, as part of the Columbia Classics line, this is the wonderful Oscar-winning film A Man for All Seasons, directed by Fred Zinnemann, based on the play and written by Robert Bolt, who of course wrote Lawrence of Arabia and worked with David Lean, and starring Robert Shaw and Paul Schofield and Orson Welles. And but I have to admit, outside of the cast, the way I first became aware of this film growing up was knowing that this was the film that cinematographer Ted Moore won his Oscar for. Ted Moore being the great genius cinematographer behind most of the early James Bond films. This film is beautifully shot. It's definitely a type of film that you couldn't get financed or made anymore. Very intellectually driven and very performance driven. If you haven't seen it, I do highly recommend it. But of course, this type of film is not for everyone. This is part of the Columbia Classics series. This is when they'd done away with the sort of marbled background. It is widescreen, but of course, being Sony, that means it's a DADC pressing. I do think some people have encountered a little bit of rot on this title, but it's not like, a death's head rotter that you should avoid. There is a DVD and there is a Blu-ray restoration, but this is a nice jacket with nice liner notes. I like the color on the back. The film is spread across 3 sides, and I do believe this was their first attempt at trying to restore the film and sort of clean it up a bit. And of course, it'll be interesting to check out the laser transfer. I haven't seen it in a little while, but it did seem like for a good portion of the 60s into the 70s, you had these very intelligent historical epics about various notable figures. And then, as sort of a subgenre of that, you had films like this where they were historical films about notable figures, but they weren't necessarily epics. And it was much more of the historical film, but on a more intimate scale. This would be, films like this. I would also, put Beckett in there, The Lion in Winter, which we'll get to in a little bit. Titles like that, and of course Cromwell, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. So, in addition to being a classic film fan and being into westerns and being into all kinds of stuff, apparently the original owner of these titles was also into historical films. So that was pretty cool. This film does have PCM mono on here in addition to the analog tracks, and should be a pretty good transfer, but of course not really going to compare to the modern restored version. This is a nice surprise. This is the 1968 version of The Charge of the Light Brigade, and this is a very lovely MGM Deluxe Letterbox edition from 1997, so it's a pretty late pressing, rather uncommon to find, and you can always tell the late MGM releases have this black Deluxe Letterbox edition banner across the top. This is a lovely 2-disc gatefold set. Really nice art, a nice picture of John Gielgud here, and of course in the usual style where they would take a central actor or actress and sort of make a collage style thing where they're like standing in front of something. This really kind of carried over from their VHS mock-ups for packaging, and that's how they did most of their LDs. So this is sort of carrying that forward. Lovely gatefold, and again, they finally learned how to use more of the expanse of the panels, but of course they put various stills on top of it, which always, I never quite understood that. Like, I can understand putting it to the side, but it's like, if you're going to use the gatefold, why do you put pictures on top of your background? But it's very nice. Again, MGM by this point in time really, again, outside of Criterion, were unsurpassed at doing this stuff. The film is spread onto 3 sides, with side 3 being a nice, generous CAV side. And what's also great about this is it has a multi-audio feature listed here, where the digital tracks have the soundtrack, and then the analog tracks have an isolated music and effects track, which of course is always great because a lot of that stuff doesn't always survive, nor is it actually presented on home video releases. Of course, this is so late in the game that you can tell here in the bottom corner, this disc was actually pressed by Image Entertainment, who had pretty much picked up the LD releases for most studios by this time point. And so pretty much all LDs from the final 3 years, 3 or 4 years or so of US LD production will usually be presented and made and manufactured by Image. This, of course, has the modern late 90s UA logo here, which is another sign that you have a later release. And I know this is supposed to have a lot of period accuracy. I've never actually seen this version, so it'll be really interesting to check out on the LD. I'm much more familiar with the 1936 Warner Brothers classic Charge of the Light Brigade, which I know kind of does its own way with the historical events, but that is a great masterpiece film. So it'll be interesting to compare that to this version, which is supposedly more historically accurate. And I told you we get to Lion in Winter. This is the lovely 25th anniversary widescreen release on LD, which is a lovely 2-disc set with a great gatefold. Love the package on this. Of course, the film was just recently restored in the past year or two, but that restoration does have some issues. So I think the LD is still a decent way to watch the film. And of course, you get the untouched mono soundtrack, which this does something interesting that I'll talk about in a second. I want to show you the gatefold. Unfortunately, the glue has come loose on the top of the front part of the gatefold, just on the top hinge. So I have to kind of hold it a little weird just to make sure to try and keep it together. The gatefold is stupendous. This is a relatively common disc. It's just always eluded me. So if you're a fan of this film and you see it for cheap, definitely just get it for the gatefold alone. This is a lovely gatefold with lovely liner notes that run the entire 2 panels. Then you get the chapter index down here in the corner. The film is on 3 sides and includes both the theatrical trailer and then a little remembrance piece with Sir Anthony Hopkins, which is a really nice thing because, again, in the LD era, you were lucky to get a trailer. So anything in addition to a trailer is golden. But that's not all. There's something interesting on here that I knew about, but I was not fully aware of how nice they were at image. So lovely rear cover, easily a phenomenal LD jacket. Of course, the film is widescreen. It's a scope film, so it's really a crime to see these pan and scanned. This film is chock full of wonderful performances if you've never seen it. Not just from, legendary figures like Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn, who was incredible in this as she was in practically everything. But you have Anthony Hopkins starting out. You have a very young Timothy Dalton giving it his all, which, of course, all 4 of those names automatically I'm in. But John Barry did the score, so this was a film I really wanted to see growing up and really enjoyed the first time, and every time I revisit it, I still enjoy it. But what's great about this release, you have a PCM mono track, and it has an isolated music track with John Barry's score. But if you look here, I thought it was just going to be on the analog track, but here in the notes, they were nice enough to include the mono isolated score on the digital track as well. So you will have to select the, one left track to just hear the film soundtrack. But what's great about this is from an audiophile perspective, you're getting a PCM mono track as opposed to the analog track with all of the inherent noise and CX noise reduction and all that stuff. I've always felt it was unfortunate. So many of the isolated tracks on LDs, they're always on the analog tracks. So you got to deal with the noise and everything that's inherent to the analog system on LD. And I was always like, it'd be so great if it could just be on the mono, on the digital track. And it's happened that way a few times, but it's very, very rare. So this makes the isolated score on here much more desirable because you're getting a clean PCM rendering of the isolated music track. But again, you'll have to have a player remote to select the left track to play by itself if you're watching the movie, because otherwise you'll just have one channel of nothing but music and one channel of the film soundtrack. It's just not how you want to experience the film. But if you have your remote, you can just select to play the left channel only. Otherwise, you'll have to wire up a speaker differently in your setup if you don't have the remote. But that's a really nice touch. I really do appreciate that, and now I'm definitely happy I finally picked this up because I'm a John Barry fanatic, and again, it's very rare the isolated tracks would make it to the digital side of things, which basically gives you a much cleaner and purer version of the isolated music track. Next up from 1969 is the Universal Letterbox release of Anne of the Thousand Days, another, again, historical film. This one produced by Hal Wallace in his late career period. And it's a film I've heard about, I've never seen before, but you have Richard Burton and Hal Wallace's name on a cover. I'm gonna watch it. I do like how they put in here, selected for the Royal Command performance of 1970 in London, to give it that extra sort of prestigious vibe. The PCM track is credited as being stereo. Again, I've never seen this film before, so I don't know for sure if this had like a magnetic stereo soundtrack or anything like that. But I assume it must have, since it does have a stereo track. It is quite a long film. It's almost 3 hours long, so it makes it right onto 3 CLV sides. And they did include the trailer and some generous liner notes, which Universal did not always do. So I do appreciate that, and the rear jacket. And the jacket overall looks quite nice. Next up is a towel I've wanted to find for a while. This is the Special Collector's Edition Deluxe Widescreen reissue of Easy Rider. of course, from Sony Columbia, which means it's a DADC pressing. And so I know some people have had rot on this issue, and then others haven't, so it's sort of a mixed bag. And it's actually a quite uncommon LD. It goes for a little bit more than most discs. It's definitely not common. You can find it if you really, really want to, but I've just never found an affordable copy, and I'll have to, check it for rot. Of course, just a single CLV disc with a nice cover that they did reuse for, I believe the first couple DVDs had this cover as well. Has some nice glossiness on the jacket, which is always nice. And as common for Columbia releases, pretty extensive liner notes for the back, smaller text so they can cram more in. The film is spread onto, of course, two sides because it's just a CLV disc. It's credited as being a special edition, I think pretty much because you get the audio commentary on the analog track. So yes, I believe this is considered a special edition, and they sold it that way because at the very end you have a chapter devoted to stills and behind-the-scenes bits, so I guess that's their attempt at doing a Criterion-style extras section, and then you do get the audio commentary on the analog tracks. I believe the commentary's been ported over to later releases. This is obviously the best version on Laserdisc to pick up. I believe this was the first major widescreen version as well, and does have the film's original mono soundtrack, PCM encoded. Of course, Criterion has released the film on Blu-ray as part of the BBS set they did. Sony's done it several times, and now has, I believe, a better master than what Criterion put out. And so there are really amazing HD versions and beyond. But if you're looking for this film on LD, this really important, historically iconic film, this would be the version to track down. But do keep in mind it can get a little pricey, and it does have the potential to have some rot on it. But honestly, with any Columbia or Sony title, you pretty much have to steel yourself for that, because you know there's a chance, even if it's not reported, because anything DADC US, most likely it could have rot. Since I already have the Criterion version and this has a stereo remix of the film, I didn't particularly need this version, but it was a cheap 95-cent copy with a gorgeous cover, so I had to pick up the deluxe letterbox reissue of Midnight Cowboy from MGM-UA. This is the 25th anniversary edition. Again, uses original artwork, looks gorgeous. I do think this looks better than the Criterion jacket of the CAV version. But that version has nice extras and has the mono soundtrack, which most later releases don't have. Lovely gatefold on here. Nice imagery. Again, MGM doing their thing of putting pictures on top of stills. That's just their thing. But it's a nice gatefold, and I like the desaturated look to it. What's also great about this is they did make basically a new documentary piece to accompany this. So if you want everything on LD, you will have to get this version and the Criterion version. But the extras on here, I do believe, have all ported over. And of course, there have been many new extras made since. The film itself, I believe, is just on two sides, and then all of side 3 is devoted to the new documentary piece, and then you get original trailers and the reissue trailer included. So that's a nice touch, and it's very nice that they actually did something other than just put some trailers on and call it an anniversary edition. The rear cover's rather nice, although you still have the traditional blank gold bar at the top, which they were still doing at the time. This does carry a Dolby Surround encoded soundtrack remix. The original track is mono, and you'll have to get the Criterion LD for that. That didn't reappear again on disc until the 2-disc DVD edition, and I believe it's also on the Criterion Blu-ray. The Criterion Blu-ray, though, has an unfortunate color timing, which really does not seem accurate. So that's one of those where, although the new transfer is great and has lovely new extras, I really don't enjoy watching it because the color just doesn't look right. So I do like the old Criterion CAV version. I like the look of this, even though it has a soundtrack remix, which is unfortunate. And the 2-disc DVD is also fine and has the mono as well. So there are a number of ways to watch the film. This is sort of an in-between, but it was nice that MGM was trying to make a spiffed-up version. The only downside for me, again, is it doesn't have the original mono track on it. This one was a real surprise. I can't remember if I've seen this all the way through, but this is Those Daring Young Men and Their Jaunty Jalopies. This is a Paramount title pressed by Pioneer as a remastered widescreen title, so this is actually a very uncommon disc. I was very surprised to see it in there for 95 cents, and also in good shape because it's not a gatefold, so the corners aren't shot, which pretty much most jackets like this, that's going to happen, particularly by 2020. Pretty nice artwork on here, and a nice star-studded cast. The film is spread onto 3 sides, no extras, no trailer or anything, but a pretty nice jacket, and it'll be interesting to check out the letterbox transfer on here. I believe the audio should be mono on the digital tracks as well, so it should be fun to watch. I believe I've seen it many years ago, so it'll be fun to revisit and check it on this LD transfer. Any of these Paramount widescreen reissues usually are on the less common side, but also the ones, anything pressed by Pioneer would it's actually, labeled on there usually is even less common. So this one does go for a decent amount on the Laserdisc database. And here's the aforementioned Cromwell from 1970. This is another Columbia Classics widescreen presentation with the Academy Award winner box on the front art to try and entice people into what is obviously a intellectual historical drama about historical figures. Not the easiest sell to people. It's been a while since I've seen this, but I remember liking it very much because, of course, with both Richard Harris and Alec Guinness, you can't really mess that up. So, again, it's been a while since I've seen this, but I do remember liking it very much. Again, for a Columbia release, you get the lovely liner notes, the lovely black jacket. The film is on 3 sides. Side 2 is actually the CAV side. Sony and some other labels would do that sometimes. Again, I don't know why they would do that instead of doing side 3, but it happens from time to time, so they give you the benefit of the slight improvement in picture quality, but it's in the middle of the film instead of the climax of the film, which is how most people, especially MGM, always did it. I don't believe there's any extras on here, but of course this was the first widescreen version of the film. Do believe this film is also mono, so the PCM track should be mono as well. And I think it would be interesting to check out this LD version. I think I've only seen it before, and I had rented the DVD edition. Of course, for DADC pressing, there's always the chance of it having some rot, but I don't think this one has any rot reports on it, so it should be good. Let's hope. Next up, also from 1970, is the interesting Western A Man Called Horse, starring Richard Harris. And I haven't seen this film in ages, so I was very happy to pick up the LD version. This is a later Fox pressing, nice glossy jacket with the smaller widescreen banner. They don't have the black bar on the bottom, but you do have the more modern Fox Video logo. I believe this disc was made in about 93 or so. It has PCM mono, a nice image from the film on the cover, so it's a pretty nice cover. And then the rear is rather stylized with a sort of parchment look to it to, I guess, suggest the Old West. This is an interesting film. If you've never seen it before, it does kind of have some shades of what you'd later see in films like Dances with Wolves. Not the same, obviously, but you have the sort of interaction between an outsider and a Native American people in the Old West. And again, it's right in the middle of the emerging revisionist Western genre cycle. So I'm excited to check this out on LD and rewatch the film. It's just a single CLV disc, PCM mono, and a pretty nice jacket. The sequel that came out a few years later, Return of a Man Called Horse, is also on a letterboxed LD, but I'll have to track that down because all I found in this lot of discs was the first film. Next up is 1972's The Poseidon Adventure. This is really the first major title of the Irwin Allen. This is really the first major title. This is really the first major title of the Irwin Allen big budget extravaganza, star-studded disaster films. And I know I'm not alone in saying this. Airport really started the whole cycle off. But this is the film that Irwin Allen really got started on, and I don't think I'm alone in feeling this is probably the best of the 70s disaster films. If you had to pick one, it would be between this and probably The Towering Inferno, which takes it to even greater heights. But I think this film has the greater focus and is probably the best of the whole cycle of disaster films. This uses the original poster art on a black jacket. It's a lovely LD jacket with the standard Fox letterbox top and bottom, digital sound moniker. It is an earlier pressing. It's got the CBS Fox logo, so I don't know what the transfer is going to look like, because it's always fun checking out LDs because you never know exactly what you're going to get transfer-wise. Really extensive liner notes, and it seems like they planned this for a gatefold, but they had to cram it all on the back because the film is just a single CLV disc. Don't think this has a trailer or anything because most early Fox discs don't. The soundtrack is credited as stereo surround, so I believe this is a remix. Does have digital audio, so you will be able to use ProLogic or a Matrix decoder to decode it out. But this film should have originally been mono as far as I knew. So I will check out the audio track, but it's probably a stereo remix, which is unfortunate. Not really a deal breaker because I was just curious to see the LD version, and this is really the one letterbox release that it has on LD. After this, there is a final late era release along with Towering Inferno, and then those made it to DVD and such. But I'm curious to check out this earlier one, and of course it's a nice minty copy for 95 cents with original poster art, so of course I'm going to buy it because I don't have enough Laserdisc, do I? Next up is this gorgeous jacket of the MGM letterbox release of The Taking of Pelham 123 from 1974. This is a really undervalued, great thriller. It was remade by Tony Scott in I believe it was the 2010s. And that's okay if you like Tony Scott films, but this is one of the great underrated 70s thrillers. Really holds up, and I love this jacket art. You don't really get any of the film stars on here. It's just a very bold, striking cover image with the gold letterbox banner across the top. Digital tracks have the film's original mono mix, and you get a lovely letterbox transfer with the theatrical trailer, and that's the extent of it having any special features. I like the rear art very much. This is a very uncommon design for MGM. You have original poster art on the sides here, and then you have the information tucked in right here. And this section is exactly probably what is on the back of the VHS cover slip box. Again, this is a really underrated 70s thriller. Please check it out if you haven't before. I do have the standard MGM Blu-ray, which is a pretty good transfer, and that was reissued. I can't remember if it was Kino or Shout Factory did one with a few extras, but with the same MGM transfer. But of course, as is usual, the encode isn't as good, so the encoding is best on the original MGM Blu-ray. But this is a great film to go back and revisit every once in a while. Again, one of the great 70s thrillers, very underrated, and this is a lovely LD pressing. I was so happy to find it for 95 cents. This is one of the handful of discs I splurged a bit on, and by splurged I mean this was a $2.95 disc, so I splurged a little bit. This is the deluxe letterbox reissue from MGM UA of the 1975 film Rollerball, directed by Norman Jewison, starring James Caan. It's now become more of a cult film, of course was remade in the 2000s in a vastly inferior remake. This was the first major edition that was actually, really watchable and in the proper aspect ratio. Uses original poster art, which looks lovely, and then you have a special letterbox banner that's stylized. It's a little bit of damage here on the side. The edge of the jacket's a little dinged, but everything else is fine. This disc usually you have to pay a bit of a premium for because it's a cult film. They didn't seemingly print a lot of copies of this, so it's not super common. It's not rare. It's not like Logan's Run type rare, but you definitely will pay a bit more for it. So I was okay splurging a little bit and spending $2.95. And the chapter breakdown here, the film spreads onto 3 sides, and you get the original trailer and then a vintage making of on-set featurette, which those are always really cool because it's literally made on the set as the film's being made, and so you get that nice vintage behind the scenes look and feel. The rear jacket is rather nice. You do get a digital soundtrack. It's credited on the front of the jacket as being Dolby Surround encoded, but again, I believe this film was originally mono, so I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I will have to spin this up and check it out. There are more modern releases now, there with tons of extras and stuff, but it is still not very easy to get the letterboxed LD version. So this was a nice find. This is actually one of those cult films that I think really deserves its status. It is rather intelligent. The concept and premise has been ripped off and knocked off a million times outside of just the crappy remake, and I think the real key is that this was made by Norman Jewison, who is a vastly underrated director and really had an interesting career and never really did the same thing twice. So I thought it was very interesting that he decided to tackle a science fiction story and really do it justice. So this is one of the really good 70s SF films. Next up is this lovely late release MGM title, the release of the Bob Rafelson picture Stay Hungry, which most will know for being the first major film to star Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is why the cover is devoted to him. Even though it's really more of a romantic comedy / drama. I've seen part of it before, never seen it all the way through, and very excited to check it out on LD. This, again, is a rather uncommon MGM later pressing. I believe this is from 1997 and features their last tiny black bar letterbox banner, which is always the sign of it being a late release or a later MGM pressing. It's also got a nice glossy sleeve, which they only started doing towards the tail end of their Laserdisc releases. Really nice striking cover image, although since it's not exactly an Arnold movie, he's not the star, the jacket kind of is geared more towards Arnold fans for sure, which is probably why this film got a letterbox release. And if you look at the back, it's very reminiscent of the Terminator rear covers on the, particularly the THX remastered widescreen disc. You have this silhouette of Arnold looking very imposing when, again, this is not a Terminator film. It's a pretty nice looking jacket, PCM mono, widescreen again for the first time pretty much on video, and this disc is pressed by Image because of course it's a later MGM release when all their stuff was handled by Image. You have the modern 90s UA logo and one of the final iterations of the MGM UA logo, so that's another way to tell this is a more modern disc. I'll be interested to finally watch this all the way through. Everything Bob Rafelson did in the 70s and beyond is always a bit interesting. He didn't do a ton of films, but so every time he did pop up with something, it is definitely a cut above the usual theatrical releases of the time period. So I am interested to see this all the way through. Like I said, I've just seen a part of it before, and this is on the uncommon side. You usually will have to pay more like $10 to $15 for a copy of this, I think, because you have Arnold fans and people who like late releases, and of course there were less of these printed because it is in the last couple of years of LD. Next up is a really gorgeous LD presentation. This is a Pioneer Special Edition release from Live Home Video of the very interesting, if a bit on the cheesy side, it's kind of a cross, but it's not quite full science fiction. It's not quite horror, but it kind of tiptoes in around those genres. If you know this film, you know what I'm talking about. Of course, this is The Boys from Brazil, and it's a very, very interesting film with a phenomenal cast, primarily headed by Gregory Peck, shown here on the cover in a really dramatic shot, and it's desaturated in its color, so it looks almost black and white, fits with the black background. It's a gorgeous LD jacket, and also a phenomenal late career performance by Sir Laurence Olivier as well. It's a film worth your time. It definitely has elements that feel like it is, trying to make something that's similar in tone to The Omen, which had come out just before this, with Gregory Peck as well. Of course, he couldn't be in the sequel to The Omen due to the climax of the first film. But this is a film I like revisiting every once in a while. It is well made. I really enjoy the lead performances. I like some of the ideas of the plot, and although it gets into science fiction territory, and it is a bit on the hokier side if you really want to split hairs. But again, it does have some of that feel of The Omen, which I really do like, and so I think that and the performances, really make it worthwhile going back to. This is a really interesting LD pressing. I've wanted to get a copy of this for a while. It's just always eluded me. It's not rare. It's not super expensive, but you will, probably pay more like $5 to $10 for this release. It's a lovely gatefold. This is the first major letterbox edition, I believe, of this title. Really lovely panels inside with imagery right from the film. Really gorgeous gatefold. And the liner notes are continued from the rear of the jacket inside. So they actually wrote a pretty decent amount of text for this. And then the chapters are actually printed across the whole gatefold. So the film is spread across 3 sides. And then it includes 2 trailers and then an original promotional featurette with on-set footage made at the time, which of course is always cool when you get to see those, because it's not done well after the fact. It's actually while the film is currently in production. It gives you that fly on the wall sense. And also, in addition to the original audio on the digital track, you actually have Jerry Goldsmith's score presented on the analog track as an isolated score, which is a really nice touch. The rear jacket is gorgeous with lovely imagery, definitely gives across the imposing nature of the film. And what's really cool is you get the technical transfer notes and how this was a early high definition scan and had to be down converted to NTSC video. Some LDs do mention this stuff. They were finally playing around with the early variants of high-definition scans, even back in the 90s. This, of course, is not what they were doing in Japan with the Muse system, but, most people are not really aware that HD scanning at least existed and was being done as early as the 1990s. Of course, it talks about how to be down converted back to NTSC resolution. What's interesting is they talk about the 525 lines of they talk about the scan was 1125 lines, had to be downscaled to 525 lines of NTSC video. So I'm thinking maybe this was not, the full 1080p HD we think of. And so this early scan was probably something more like a 1080i interlace scan or something done to some sort of HD tape, like a lot of these early transfers were. And then a little while afterwards, into the DVD era, Sony kind of picked up this and ran with it. So if you look at the back of most Sony DVDs, it says mastered in high definition, which means they did an HD scan of sorts. And then other studios would do that. They'd make their DVDs from that. And that's why you see various sort of DVD-looking HD versions of films show up on television broadcasts all the time, because they're literally just using an HD master that's sitting around, but it's pretty much made to make a DVD. But that stuff extends all the way back to Laserdisc, which this is an example of that. And I always really enjoy anytime they put the technical notes here with some amount of detail, so you get an idea of what you're looking at. As far as the soundtrack, it is stereo with ProLogic encoding. I believe this film probably was originally Dolby Stereo, because it is from the late 70s, but I'm not exactly sure if it does have a mono mix. I've rented this before, I've seen it on TV a bunch, but I've never actually physically owned a copy, and there is a nice new Blu-ray out, which I believe is from Shout Factory, which I would like to pick up, because this is an interesting film to revisit every once in a while, but very happy to have the really lovely-looking LD Special Edition. We have another film based on a popular best-selling author's work that kind of delves into science fiction and horror. This is the film Coma, actually directed by Michael Crichton as well. This is the letterbox presentation from MGM-UA. It's the first letterbox presentation of the film on video. And while, again, you do have some of the slight hokiness of it being dated, obviously, to the 70s, and the premise being a little on the cheesy side, it's also got the horror vibes, because it is, preying upon the fears that people might have of what exactly does happen when you go under for medical procedures. So it does have its moments, and again, it's tiptoeing between science fiction and horror and straight drama. I think all the early Michael Crichton films are interesting. This one, it's not exactly a favorite of mine, but I've seen it a couple times over the years, and it's always interesting. So I was happy to pick this up on LD. It's definitely one of those titles that it's not super common, but a lot of people kind of like this film, so they'll be more willing to buy it on Laserdisc, which of course drives the prices up. I think on the LD database that one of the user reviews says the transfer on this is kind of rough, like the print element they use is a little on the rough side, so I will check that out. The rear jacket's really nice. I really like the background shot of Michael Douglas here, and you have the typical blank gold bar on the back. It's a single CLV disc and does include the original trailer. PCM audio, I believe this is a mono film. I'm not sure. It may be Dolby Stereo, but anytime by the late 70s, you still didn't have everything fully on board with stereo. So there's still a lot of mono films from the late 70s, early 80s. So sometimes I have a hard time remembering which ones actually did have stereo. But yeah, it should be an interesting watch. Like I said, I've seen it a couple times over the years, and it's been a little while, so I'm interested to rewatch it and check out the LD presentation. Next up is a real surprise find. This is the Warner Brothers letterbox reissue of the Blake Edwards film 10 from 1979, which here has the, of course, iconic image of Bo Derek on the beach, which has been lampooned about 1 billion times, even in commercials. This is a interesting, slice of the time period to go back and revisit every once in a while. I haven't really seen this in years, and this letterbox pressing is actually very uncommon. It's from 1996, so it's the more modern Warner Brothers style. You have the nice glossy jacket with original artwork, which looks great. The widescreen banner is tucked away in the bottom corner, but unfortunately it's not a gatefold, so I was very surprised to find this in such good shape. The corners are intact, there's no crumpling, there's no crinkling, so I will definitely do my best to keep this nice and pristine like this is. Like I said, this is a rather uncommon title to find in the widescreen version. I believe there's a number of earlier pan and scan versions. And this was a pretty popular title and was, obviously shown a lot on television and, rented a lot on tape. But this was a really nice, spiffed up Warner's reissue. It's spread over 3 sides and does include the theatrical trailer. PCM audio, again, can't remember for sure if this is mono or Dolby Stereo. But should be a really interesting watch. And I'm happy to revisit this. And we'll get to more Blake Edwards in a bit, so I think the owner of all these discs, this collection, was a Blake Edwards fan as well. I should also mention that in addition to the trailer, it does include a of the time period production promotional featurette. Again, I really enjoy seeing those. And the third side is in CAV, which Warner Brothers was very good at doing, like MGM, so you do get the benefit of the CAV format for the final side. This was a really surprising find to come across. This is the very late in the game Paramount remastered widescreen reissue of the film North Dallas 40, which is a title I've never actually seen, but due to the cast and crew and the fact that this is a very late, very hard to find widescreen remaster, I definitely picked it up for 95 cents. The jacket is really nice. There's a little tiny bit of edgeware here where it's kind of gotten a little tiny bit crumpled, but that's okay. It's very easy to overlook. The rest of the jacket is lovely. Doesn't have any logos on it, so good job, Paramount. You're doing better than Warner Brothers. Again, this is a 1998 release, so I believe this immediately got ported to DVD, like a lot of Paramount remastered LDs. Of course, this has PCM original audio, whereas the DVD will not. The rear jacket's quite nice. I like the imagery. It's very classy looking, like a lot of these Paramount widescreen reissues. I really love finding these. They're very difficult to find, even the more common ones. Paramount seemed to have just done these for like fans of the films and just kind of like printed a few, and then that's it. Again, this is a 1998 release. It's very uncommon. You will have to pay a decent amount of money compared to most LDs trying to get a copy of this. It's a single CLV disc, 2-sided. I believe this is a mono track, but again, it could be Dolby Stereo. I'm not for sure. I was also interested to check this out because This is Nick Nolte just before, a couple years before, doing 48 Hours, which is, I think, one of the great films of the 80s. And it's directed by Ted Kotcheff, who shortly after this would go and do direct First Blood, which is easily the best and the great film of the Rambo series. So I'm interested to see both of them kind of do what is seemingly a gritty late 70s comedy. So very interested to check this out. And again, a really cool find of a late pressing. Next up is the MGM UA letterbox release of The Long Riders, which is the Walter Hill Western that actually I could have sworn that I had this on LD, but it wasn't in my database collection. It's one of those times where I'm looking at a disc and I can't remember if I actually own this already or not. But since it was in nice shape and 95 cents, I erred on the side of caution. So I have to double check and make sure I don't have a copy of this already. But this is a pretty well-loved Western among Western aficionados. It's been a little while since I've seen it, so I do want to check this out on the LD presentation and check out the transfer and rewatch the film because it's been a while. But the most notable thing is the cast is made up of a bunch of real-life brothers playing, actual sibling characters. So that's what really, I think, makes it more interesting than just being a standard Western. It's a single CLV disc, does include the original trailer. Pretty sure this was Dolby Stereo, so that's what should be on the PCM tracks. But again, it's hard to remember what was mono or stereo in the transitional period of the late 70s, early 80s. This one was one of the other ones I splurged a little bit on and spent an extra buck or two. It's got a little bit of wear, but the cover's just gorgeous. This is the MGM letterbox release of Clash of the Titans from 1981. Which really is the final swan song for Ray Harryhausen and his incredible techniques. This film has really some of the most intricate work that he ever did, and of course is after an entire lifetime as a pioneering visual effects artist. So, if you are at all a fan of stop motion and have not seen this, you really owe it to yourself to check out what is really his... people kind of go back and forth on what's like the greatest Harryhausen film in terms of the stop motion effects, but this one you can definitely tell all the experience that came with this being like the final huzzah. Of course, it's been remade, and really the remake doesn't even need to be mentioned. This has gorgeous original poster art, looks amazing on the LD jacket. Going to the DVD, it doesn't really do it justice in terms of the artwork. There's a little bit of crumpling here in the corner and a little bit of wear on the edge, but otherwise it's great. Just a beautiful looking jacket with a rather nice gatefold that gives you all of the stars in a nice photo around Sir Laurence Olivier as Zeus, and looks really, really impressive. Then here on the second panel, they very nicely put all the chapters here in the center with more images blocking it. This is, I think, one of the best gatefolds MGM ever did. It's actually laid out with a real design aesthetic, which they did not do very often, so I am very much appreciative of that. The film's spread across 3 sides and does include the theatrical trailer at the end. Again, I do believe this film was Dolby Stereo, so I'm pretty sure the digital tracks are Dolby Stereo, but again, I could be wrong because I have a hard time remembering which films were Dolby Stereo and which films were mono. And again, they went back and forth from the immediate post-Star Wars period up until the mid-'80s, so sometimes it's hard to keep track of which was which. Beautiful looking rear jacket, again, several steps above what MGM would do typically. And side 3 is CAV encoded, so you will be able to perfectly stop frame all the effects work and all the final climactic sequences to get a better glimpse at what Harryhausen was doing. So that's a very cool touch. It would have been cool if this was full CAV to be able to do that for all the sequences, but of course then that would have necessitated much more sides and a box set. But really lovely release. Of course, there's the DVD and later iterations, but this is still a fine way to revisit the film. This is another really gorgeous Pioneer Special Edition release of the film On Golden Pond. Really, really beautiful jacket. I love the light blue tinting and the reflections of the title. Just absolutely gorgeous looking. And if you look at the gatefold, it's one of those where they actually printed it the opposite way. So you get the listing of the contents because this has a director commentary on the analog track, a isolated music and effects track on the other analog track, and then it's got the actual mix of the film, the full soundtrack on the digital tracks. I'm going to try and do this as best I can. But the actual text is here on the top panel, and of course you have to read it sideways. And then the chapter listings are here. The film is actually just a single CLV disc, but the third side that's included is a making-of documentary. You get the extra credits here, advertising a new widescreen transfer, director commentary, original trailers included, and in the documentary there's also a deleted scene included as well. The film soundtrack is Dolby Stereo. It's actually encoded as surround here. Actually, they let you know, which is cool. And you get the multi-audio logo, usually on MGM discs down there, to indicate there's a commentary and isolated tracks as well. So this is a really, really lovely release. Obviously the best version on Laserdisc, and it's actually in widescreen. These Pioneer Special Editions by this point, I mean, just gorgeous examples of LD packaging. Still the best packaging the film has had. And of course, it's had successive reissues on DVD and Blu-ray, but still a lovely, lovely release. So here is more Blake Edwards. This is the Warner's letterbox release of SOB, which is a really underrated industry dark comedy. Gorgeous jacket with original artwork. It's on glossy cardstock. It's got a little bit of crumpling because, again, Warner's would not spring for a gatefold. Still nice, so there's no logos crowding up, except you do have the closed captioning logo on the front. Then the rear is the typical Warner style, but again, it's kind of interesting that this is on a glossy jacket, because usually at this point they weren't doing glossy jackets all that much. This is actually the harder to find widescreen version. There is a pan and scan version that looks almost identical, but here, as you can see, there's the widescreen info box and the widescreen logo there, so definitely look for this widescreen version to not get stuck with the pan and scan edition. This was more of a curiosity pickup. This is the letterbox release of Time Bandits, which is Paramount, and you can tell by their tiny widescreen edition banner across the top and how they would use the Laserdisc logo on the jacket. I do have the Criterion CLV reissue, which is a pretty late release, and it's one of my best looking discs. I think it's got a phenomenal transfer. This is from about 95, I think, so it's about 3 years older, and I'm just curious to see if it's that same amazing transfer or to see what Paramount did or if they use a different element. This is in mint condition with the original poster art. It looks lovely. So for 95 cents, I figured it was worth a check for curiosity's sake and for the super minty jacket. If you've never seen this film, it's very Terry Gilliam. It's probably my favorite Terry Gilliam picture after Jabberwocky. It really manages to be very successful as a narrative and also have just enough of the whimsy without, going overboard. Between this and Brazil and probably 12 Monkeys as well, but this and Brazil are, for me, the two best Terry Gilliam films. This one kind of maybe edges out Brazil a little bit because you can watch this at any time, whereas you have to really kind of be in the mood for Brazil. And also, this is a great film for children that doesn't, isn't afraid to be a little on the darker or scarier side at times, which is very refreshing. So it's great for adults, great for kids, and really kind of a one-of-a-kind experience, just like anything that Terry Gilliam has ever done. I enjoy revisiting it, so it'll be interesting to check out this LD transfer and to be able to compare it to the Criterion. Of course, there's different Blu-rays out there available. They're great. Arrow did the UK one. There's great Blu-rays here in the States, so you can get a great HD version, but just was very curious to check out this LD edition. This is another one of those 90s Warner letterbox reissues of a title that has a much more common earlier pan and scan version. This is the Clint Eastwood picture Firefox. This is a 1995 letterbox pressing. Gorgeous jacket, original artwork. I love that's on a black background, and they kept the logos to a nice discreet corner. But because it's Warner Brothers, there's no gatefold. And as you can see, we have some spine tearing here on the top and on the side. And so that's just bound to happen because the disc will literally just slide around and bust out at the seams. Corners are okay. There's a little bit of ring wear, but the nice glossy jacket really looks impressive. It's just unfortunate because of the due to the nature of the design and Warner never springing for gatefolds that pretty much all of these types of editions are going to have damage somewhere. It's very rare you get a copy like the 10 copy I just went over a minute ago that is super minty. But otherwise, I was surprised to find this. Again, this is a pressing from 1995. Not super common. You'll usually find the earlier pan and scan disc. Film is on 3 sides. Dolby Stereo encoded PCM track with the original audio. No extras or anything. One side is at least CAV. I'm pretty sure it's side 3 because that's usually what everybody would do. So you do get that benefit as well, and the nice new letterbox transfer. Again, the jacket's really impressive, even though this is not really a very good 80s Eastwood film. It's been a while since I've seen it. I've been meaning to go back and watch all the various films he's directed or starred in through the 70s and 80s, because I've seen most of them, but it's been a very long time. So this is just a nice way to chip away at that on a lovely Warner Brothers letterbox remaster. Next up, we have more Blake Edwards. This from 1982, the wonderful film Victor Victoria. And this is the MGM UA letterbox pressing, which is actually quite common, with this cover and everything. But if you know the late release of MGM very well, particularly issues like the 2001 and 2010 that add AC3, you'll note the addition of the Dolby Digital logo here, which indicates this is actually the very hard to find late 1997, early 98 repress that adds a AC3 track and presumably spiffs up the transfer a bit, but they actually reused the original jackets. So the only way to tell the difference is the catalog number is different, and the AC3 version has this little Dolby Digital indicator on the front and the back. Otherwise, it's identical to the common pressing, so I've always held out to find this later one. The digital tracks are still the original Dolby Stereo, so you get the benefit of having AC3 if you desire. So I was very surprised to see this, and at first, you're not paying attention. It looks identical to the standard release, so always check the handful of MGM AC3 titles because, like with 2001 and 2010, it's very easy to accidentally pass up the much harder to find AC3 version. And again, I'm sure it's probably the same master, but with a much cleaner disc pressing, but of course it's very possible that this is a brand new master and what was used for the first DVD. Film is on 3 sides, which I believe is how the original issue is. Again, the rear jacket is identical, except for Dolby Digital here, and this is actually pressed by Image because it's a late release for MGM. So there's no mention of the year on the back of the jacket outside the original 1990 pressing. So again, I'm pretty sure this was 97, 98 because it's one of those very late era MGM AC3 reissues, which is very uncommon to find because they didn't print a lot of these, and it's very easy to mix them up with the original pressing because again they just reused the old jackets. Now this was a real shock of a find. As cool as it was finding late MGM AC3 titles, I did not expect to find this for 95 cents for sure. This is the late release 1998 letterbox reissue pressing of the film Brainstorm, which was made by Douglas Trumbull and was really designed to show off his show scan process, which was a format designed to use large format, higher frame rate, 70 millimeter motion picture stock in a way to enhance the theatrical viewing experience. This never took off, and this film is a mixture of that and standard 35 millimeter. So it has a multi-aspect ratio shifting process throughout. When the Christopher Walken character engages the special mechanics involved in the film and goes on basically these trips or sequences, that's when we switch to the show scan material. So this transfer, I believe, is 185, and then for the special sequences goes to a 235 scope formatting, which is not quite exactly the same. And of course, this is on LD, so it's not the intensive theatrical experience. But this film has never been quite transferred to home video correctly, and this was an attempt to finally do it correctly. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a really good presentation, and it does have the shifting aspect ratios, which I think later versions kind of removed some of that, and I think this was just dumped on DVD, and that's about all they've done. It has a Dolby AC3 track added in addition to the ProLogic PCM track, so the AC3 should better replicate the more intensive sound experience that was supposed to go along with the show scan system. As a film, it's been a while since I've seen it, but it tries to do a lot. It has a lot of great ideas. It's not entirely successful 100%, but you have to appreciate just for what they were trying to achieve on both a storytelling and technical basis. And this is a very uncommon LD. This is an LD that will usually be in the $15 to $20 range, and it is also a late release from 1998. It's got lovely packaging. Again, it's pressed by Image because this is late release MGM, and you get the benefit of having AC3 and the shifting aspect ratios. There is an earlier version on LD, but it doesn't quite do the same with the proper shifting aspect ratios, so this is the version you'll want to track down. And again, it is a bit on the pricey side, so this was a wonderful surprise, and I'm really excited to look at this film again after a long while and check out the shifting aspect ratios on this Laserdisc transfer. Next up from Orion, this is the 1984 film The Bounty, which of course is one of the many versions based on the classic tale Mutiny on the Bounty. This originally started life, it was going to be a David Lean production, and unfortunately after many years it fell through and eventually got resuscitated as the film we're talking about here from 1984. That's why Robert Bolt actually wound up writing the screenplay. So it is a great what if David Lean had made a version of Mutiny on the Bounty and what would have been like. It's been a while since I've seen this version. I do remember it being pretty decent and having nice production values and a great cast. I've never sat down and done a comparison of the major versions. Generally, the 1935 MGM version with Clark Gable and Charles Laughton is the go-to great film version. The 62 version with Brando is really a bloated affair, but it's fascinating in how it doesn't work in a lot of ways. And nowadays, there's fans of the 62 version, which I never thought that would be a thing, but that's such a bizarre film of excess that you have to like it in a strange, perverted way. So this is probably a version trying to do it much more straight and is kind of in between those two versions. But again, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I am excited to check it out again on LD. You get pretty nice liner notes. It's a pressing by Image, but again from Orion. You get the Dolby Surround original track on the digital tracks and a nice amount of liner notes with some nice imagery. But again, like Warner Brothers, because it's not a gatefold, there is some spine wear where the discs have started to bust through over the years. The film's spread across 3 sides, no extras or bonus features or anything, but a nice looking presentation. I'll be interested to check this version out again. Here is 1985 Silverado. This is the letterbox Sony repressing after the lovely Criterion Special Edition. I've wanted to pick this up to compare it just out of curiosity because it is, significantly later. It doesn't have all the extensive supplemental section of the Criterion CAV version, but it does have, the original Dolby Stereo mix like the Criterion, and it has a much more visually interesting cover. It's got the same image of the cast, but it's over this sort of dark sunset background, which looks really nice on an LD jacket. Again, no gatefold, but at least this copy doesn't have a lot of seam splitting. Of course, this being a Columbia disc, there is always the possibility of it being a DADC rotter. There are copies of this out there that are rotted. I'm not sure about this one. I'll have to check it out. But again, it was a 95-cent find, and usually you don't find this version for that cheap. You usually find the older pan and scan versions. The film spread across 3 sides and does include a number of trailers, which the Criterion did as well. So it's very possible Sony just reused the Criterion transfer like they did a number of times. But it's also possible that their pressing is maybe a bit better because it's a couple years difference in terms of the manufacture date. You do have a little bit of an interview piece with Lawrence Kasdan recounting the making of the film, which you get a lot of that from the producer on the Criterion CAV gatefold. I'm sorry, CAV box set. So it is nice they were, paying tribute a little bit more and not just cranking out a film-only reissue. So you do get a bit of bonuses, and you do get a bit of a nicer cover with some liner notes. Again, original Dolby Stereo mix is on here, which is great, and I'm just going to check this out and compare it to the Criterion transfer, because I'm very curious to see if there's any differences. Next up is another Orion widescreen title. This is the film FX, which you see a lot of bargain bins in the pan and scan version, this and its sequel. I've seen the cover a million times. I've never actually seen this film. And this is the harder to find widescreen version. Again, you usually find a pan and scan, or it may be open matted slightly version. I wasn't even aware this had a widescreen edition, so this was a nice find. It's got a nice glossy sleeve. Some, the artwork is just an explosion, but that always will sell a disc. Of course, it looks much nicer than the usual versions you find, because it's printed a bit later. It's an image pressing again, Dolby Surround, original audio on the digital tracks, and it looks like a pretty nice release. So this will be a fun way to finally watch this film that I've seen a million times in bargain bins. Now, this is one I've wanted to find for a while. This is The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford, the Peter Weir film, also starring River Phoenix, and it's a really interesting, different sort of drama. It's one of Harrison Ford's great dramatic performances on screen outside of his iconic roles. I've always really loved the art for this. This is from the original poster. You usually find the pan and scan version of this, so I was very excited to find the letterbox version that, like Warner was doing at this time. They actually used the whole jacket. It looks really nice. It's got a little bit of corner crinkling, but that's bound to happen over the time, ever since this disc was made, just from general handling. Really, really gorgeous jacket. Really interesting film, and I'm just very happy to finally find the letterbox version. I always held out to find this edition. And because this is a later 90s pressing, you get an actual rear cover without the silver bar. The film's just on a single CLV disc, and I believe the pan and scan one was spread across 3 sides, so that's an interesting change. I guess they realized they could, save a disc side. Again, letterbox transfer on this one, Dolby Stereo on the digital tracks, which is the original audio, and excited to revisit this. It's a very good film from what I remember, kind of underrated, and you don't come across the letterboxed LD version all that often. It's usually almost always the pan and scan version, so I was very happy to finally find this one. Next up is the Fox letterbox release of the Coen Brothers picture Miller's Crossing, and this is a really nice LD you don't come across all the time. It's actually a pressing from 1997, so it's pretty late in the game, and I'm really excited to check this out because I'm expecting it to have a really great transfer. The cover is relatively simple, but it's a nice moment from the film, and it looks pretty imposing on a 12-inch jacket. It's very somber, and you get a nice glossy coating on the jacket with the typical late period Fox widescreen banner with the searchlights, which I've always liked. It's got a little bit of seam splitting here on the top and the center, which is usually where it's going to happen. On the sides, it's almost always in the center, but it's not terrible, and it doesn't destroy the jacket or anything. The rear looks pretty nice. You get a nice amount of liner notes, and I like how it's in a nice green box. It's much more composed than, the old-fashioned Fox gray background early widescreen copies. You still get the original style widescreen edition logo there. It's a single CLV disc with the film's original Dolby Stereo track on the digital track. So that'll be fun to hear it that way, because most releases have a 5.1 remix. No real extras, just film-only transfer, and be interesting to revisit this. And again, especially for a disc printed in 97, I'm very interested to check out the transfer. Next up from 1992 is the thriller Past Midnight. This was a blind buy for me simply for the cast involved. Anything Rutger Hauer is in, I will check out. I don't know, the plot synopsis of this seems familiar, so I don't know if I saw part of it on television once and just kind of forgot about it, but It just seemed interesting, and it's actually a pretty uncommon LD title to find. So definitely goes for usually a lot more than 99 cents. It's a Columbia pressing, of course. I like how they put the widescreen banner in green, so they tried to match the cover as opposed to doing just their usual black. Because of that, there's always the possibility for it to have rot. The database doesn't have any cases on this one being a rotter, but I'm always leery of a DADC title. But yeah, apparently this is a rarer title to find, so I just went ahead and picked it up because it seemed interesting enough, and the cover art looks pretty nice, although it looks like they're trying to sell it more as a horror film. Letterbox transfer, Dolby Stereo on the digital tracks, no extras, but you do get some nice liner notes, which Columbia pretty much excelled at. This was a really interesting find to see for 95 cents. This is the Wim Wenders film, Far Away So Close, from 1993. A really nice looking letterbox copy from Sony. They actually have the Sony Pictures Classics banner down here, which I hadn't even realized started that early in the 90s. So it's really interesting to see that on an LD jacket. Of course, the film is very well renowned for its storytelling and its cast and its soundtrack, which, of course, the title of this is the same title as one of the great U2 songs from their Zooropa album. It's been a little while since I've seen this, and I just never thought about this being on LD, especially not letterboxed. So it was just a no-brainer to pick it up for 95 cents. I do like the cover art, and of course the rear you get the usual nice Sony liner notes, but again, there's no gatefold, so there's a little bit of wear and tear because the discs have just been shoved in there and slid around over the years. So yeah, it's a relatively longer film, 146 minutes on this version, and yeah, it just was something never occurred to me that it was actually out there on Laserdisc. So this was just a 95-cent why not pickup. This is the thriller Blink in a widescreen edition, and apparently it's a lot harder to find this one because there's a pan and scan version floating around as well. Pretty nice looking art. This was a blind buy for me as well, and it's also got some nice glossiness going on the sleeve, which is always a nice touch. But the real reason why I picked this up is, not only does it have a positive Roger Ebert review blurb, but this is directed by Michael Apted, and I do have this strange desire to see everything the Bond directors of the Bond franchise did before and after the series. So there's a lot of interesting little thrillers from the 80s and 90s that directors of the Pierce Brosnan era wound up doing. So if I get the chance to check any of those out, I try to go ahead and do so. This is just a single CLV disc, no extras, with a Dolby Stereo track. It's a New Line release, but it's pressed by Image, so it's an Image disc technically, even though New Line usually falls under Warner Brothers. I picked this one up on a whim. This is the film An Awfully Big Adventure. This is done shortly after Four Weddings and a Funeral, so you have Mike Newell and Hugh Grant doing another film afterwards. I know I've seen this at least once before because I knew that Hugh Grant had been in a film with Alan Rickman, but I can't remember very much about it. So I'm just interested to give this a watch and see how it goes. And it's also a nice widescreen edition. So interesting looking film, 95 cents, and it's widescreen. I'm going to pick it up. Of course, this is available on DVD, but this has a Dolby Surround digital track, no AC3, and I believe this film is from 95 or so it could have AC3, which I think it might on the DVD. I'm not for certain. Just a single CLV disc, no real extra features. But I do like that the aspect ratio is actually credited as being 1:6:6 here, so it'll be interesting to check out because it's very rare for titles to make it over in 1:6:6. It's almost always 1:8:5. This is the 1995 picture Wild Bill, directed by Walter Hill, and that's the primary reason why I wanted to see this. Is it's a Walter Hill film I've never seen and a 90s Western that's supposed to be pretty well mounted, so that was a no-brainer. It's credited as being a deluxe letterbox edition, but it's just a single CLV disc. Nice cover art. Unfortunately, it's a little corner crimpling, but that's okay. It's not a deal breaker for the less than $1 price. What's also great about this, it has a Pro Logic track and an AC3 track. So this is a nice, cheapy AC3 title you can pick up to test out your demodulator. Nice looking rear art, and of course no gatefold because it's just a single disc. It does include the original trailer, but that's relatively it for extras. So I guess because it's a trailer and it's in widescreen, that's how it can be a deluxe letterbox release. But still a nice looking jacket, and by this point MGM was pretty much unmatched in doing nice disc pressing. So should be a nice way to first experience the film. And I think Walter Hill's lesser known and lesser discussed pictures are usually worth your time. There's always something interesting going on, even if the film isn't entirely successful. Next up is the interesting underrated film Blood and Wine, which was directed by Bob Rafelson, so he appears again, and it's a really it's kind of an odd duck in that it's a mid '90s crime thriller with various characters on the edge of desperation, centered around a great Jack Nicholson performance. Which basically, if Bob Rafelson wanted to do something, he could convince Jack to be in it. But it would be an okay film if it was just that. But what really makes this a special title is Michael Caine's performance. He has a smaller role; it's more of a supporting part, but he is just so phenomenal. And it really makes the film worth your time and worth watching, particularly his interplay with Jack Nicholson. And it's very rare that anybody can, be at Jack's level on screen, and Michael Caine just outdoes him. He steals the whole picture, and it's a shame that the movie isn't about his character. And in his autobiography, Michael Caine actually said at this point that he was thinking about retiring, and Jack convinced him to do this film, and it was the first time in years he really enjoyed himself. So he credits this film and Jack for being the inspiration for him to continue his acting career, which I think makes it even more important. So I like this film a lot better than its own merits because Michael Caine is so phenomenal in this. And it's a nice, really great late career Jack performance as well. This is a letterbox pressing from Fox using the original art. It looks really nice on an LD jacket. Get some nice liner notes. It's a pretty nice rear cover, even though it's just a white background. The only problem is they cheaped out, and this release does not have AC3. It just has a Dolby Surround track. So I believe the DVD has AC3, and there's not like a fancy Blu-ray out there or anything. But yeah, unfortunately, they cheaped out and did not include the AC3 track. Otherwise, it's just a single CLV disc. No extras, doesn't even have a trailer, but at least it's widescreen with some form of surround audio. And I just figured it'd be fun to watch this on LD and check out the transfer. And again, totally recommended for the Michael Caine performance alone, which is worth the whole cost of admission. Next up is unfortunately another title where they cheaped out and didn't add AC3. This is the 1996 film The Chamber, based on the John Grisham novel of the same name. And I've been trying to see or rewatch the various John Grisham adaptations, which usually are not as good as the original books. This one doesn't have a great reputation, but I like the cast, and I've never seen this particular film adaptation, so finding a nice copy in widescreen on LD for 95 cents, it was like, yeah, why not? But it's unfortunate that this film, released in the AC3 era, only has a Dolby Surround track on the Universal release. But to Universal, they were doing that at the time because they were partnered with DTS. So they would put out their LDs with Dolby Surround only, like the first release of Casino. Then by 97, when DTS LD was a thing, they would put out a DTS Laserdisc. And then eventually they started doing some AC3 titles, but by that point, LD was kind of trickling off, so they didn't do a whole lot of them that actually have AC3 when they should have. It's kind of unfortunate, but you just get to a point where it's Universal. It's going to not have AC3 unless it was reissued later on, or it got a DTS Laserdisc, which this film didn't get either. So I believe the DVD just has, I believe it has 5.1, but it may just still be 2.0. So I figured give this a watch on LD. It's just a single CLV title. It's a pretty common disc, but I've just never found a cheap, clean copy, so this was a no-brainer pickup. This is, of course, one I've wanted to get for a while. This is Escape from LA, and goes hand in hand with having the lovely special edition Escape from New York LD. So I wanted to pick this up. The art is quite nice on an LD jacket, even though this film doesn't have a very good reputation and has the notoriously silly early CGI effects that are terrible. So I figured if I was going to rewatch this, I could watch that on LD with the original film, and hopefully the effects kind of stand up a bit better because you're looking at it on analog video instead. Also curious to see what the transfer is like, and it's otherwise a nice widescreen Paramount release. What's also cool is this, of course, has AC3 in addition to Dolby Surround, so you can use this for an AC3 test disc. As far as the disc itself, it's just single CLV, two sides, no extras, no anything. There are nice newer versions out there, but this is just movie only. But because it's John Carpenter, because it's the sequel to Escape from New York, it's usually a bit pricier, and usually you can't get a decent copy of this for, it's a pretty common title, but you have to pay a nice premium for it because of everybody wanting to get this simply because it's Escape from LA. So usually this will cost you more like $5 to $10 when, again, it's not rare or anything. But very happy to finally have a nice copy. Very happy to have it for 95 cents for sure. Well, apparently I put this in the wrong place because I didn't pay enough attention to the details on the back. So this is actually a 1995 film, but it's got the 1996 date on it on the back. So apologies for that. So this is the MGM release of A Family Thing, which is, obviously more of a drama, but it's got a deluxe letterbox edition release. It has AC3 and Dolby Surround. So yeah, this is actually a pretty late pressing. So again, anytime I find a late MGM release, I buy it if it's cheap. So this is a no-brainer. I'm sure this will have a nice transfer, but I've never seen this film before, and the cast alone, the two leads are great, and it has the sign of approval from Siskel and Ebert on the cover, so that earned my 95 cents for sure. Again, much nicer jacket design, much more of a better use of the 12-inch LD jacket, and again, it's a later pressing, so this is actually pressed by Image, so that's why their credit's on here. Just a single CLV disc, does include a trailer, but I'm really interested because this is another, AC3 disc, so I definitely don't pass up AC3 Laserdisc if it's, 95 cents for sure. Next up is the Warner's release, letterboxed, of the film Sleepers, which was made by Barry Levinson. I've never seen this all the way through, but I swear I saw part of it on cable or something at one point. Really nice cover art, but again, no gatefold, so it's got a lot of crinkling and stuff. Again, I don't know why companies wouldn't spring for gatefolds more often. Your jackets are just going to get damaged. It's got a little ring wear, but it's a decent enough shape, and it was 95 cents. Otherwise, it's a nice pressing from Warner's. It does have AC3 in addition to Dolby Surround. Pretty nice cover art for sure, and it's spread over three sides, and I believe, not for sure, I don't know if one side is CAV because I don't see a standard play credit. Yes, all three sides are CLV, probably because I believe the runtime of this is a bit longer, so they just kept it all CLV. That's a nice looking release, and especially with this cast and crew, the talent on board, definitely seems like it'd be worth my time, although the story kind of seems like it definitely borrows elements of classic Warner gangster era titles like Angels with Dirty Faces or Mayor of Hell, for example. So that also piques my interest because I adore those films. But yeah, this just looked like a nice watch and a nice mid-90s pressing from Warner's that's actually letterboxed and does have AC3. Here is the Warner Brothers release of LA Confidential, letterboxed on Laserdisc with the original poster artwork. And although this is pretty much going to be the same as what turned up on the DVD, I'm pretty sure, the very first Snapper Case one. It's a title I've always wanted to pick up because I really love the film and I was curious about what the Laserdisc was like. Usually when I watch this, I just rewatch the Blu-ray with the lossless audio soundtrack. But again, this has the poster art where a lot of the Blu-rays don't. Looks great on an LD jacket, and I finally found a nice minty copy because usually it shouldn't cost you a lot, but usually when you find a copy, it's either beat to crap or it's a bit pricey. But nice condition jacket. Again, not a gatefold, so it's very common to find this really beat up. So it's nice to have a copy that's not all crumpled and has its spine shot out. Again, really cool to have the poster artwork on here. Looks great on an LD jacket. On the pressing side of things, it's a 1998 pressing, which makes it technically a late release. It's also handled by Image, which is why their logos... It's also handled by Image, which is why their logo is here on the rear cover. And it's just a film transfer spread across three sides. It does include a featurette at the end of side 3, but that's it in terms of special features. I don't even think it includes the trailer. You do have a ProLogic encoded stereo track, which is pretty much exclusive to this and VHS. And of course, you have the AC3 track, which is what you're really going to want to listen to. But I'm very curious to check out this film on LD, look at the transfer, see what it's like. The jacket is lovely. It's unfortunate it's not a gatefold, but I'm happy I found a nice cheap copy that's in good shape. Very curious to check out the sound too, see if there's any differences compared to the DVD and Blu-ray that I'm used to. But I think it'll be interesting to give this a rewatch, but check out the Laserdisc finally. Also from 97 is this adaptation of Mario Puzo's novel, The Last Dawn. I'm pretty sure this was a made-for-television film because it even says, teleplay by on the back. I've never seen this, but I have tried to read a number of Puzo's other novels. Some I really enjoyed, and, I really need to get around to reading the rest of them. So when this turned up, I figured it was time to give this a shot. This is a Pioneer pressing, and again, pretty nice cover art done to mimic the style artwork of the Godfather trilogy and how it looked on video, particularly the VHS releases, I think. So this was, I think, done in every way to mimic those. 2 discs, and of course, following everybody's lead, no gatefold. The jacket's in really nice shape, and it does include a Dolby Surround encoded PCM track, which is always nice. Again, I do think this is a made-for-television film. Runs about 2.5 hours, so not like a mini-series, but a made-for-TV film. I also believe this is in the 1:3 aspect ratio, which would tie into it being a TV film. No extras or anything, just spread across 3 sides, and I'll give this a go. I'm usually interested in anything that has Puzo's name involved in it somewhere. Of course, no idea what it's going to turn out like, but for 95 cents, I'll give it a shot. Next up is another late release. This is A Life Less Ordinary, the Danny Boyle picture from Fox, nice letterbox edition. It's a 1998 pressing, so it is technically a late release, and not a super common disc, but not super rare, but usually goes for a couple bucks. I really like the cover art, which mimics the original poster, but the problem with this release is, once again, they cheaped out and didn't include the AC3 track. So I got this to check out for the transfer. It's got this nice cover with the modern Fox widescreen banner. But, of course, the problem is that it doesn't have AC3, which is really a shame, because in the digital sound era, I don't know why they would cheap out and always skip the AC3 on a lot of releases. So you do get a Per-Logic encoded mix, which, again, will not be most likely on the DVD and Blu-ray. I don't have any other version of this film, and I haven't seen this in ages, so I figured it'd be cool to check out on this nice late-release laser. Nice information and nice liner notes on the back here. I really like that they tried to do something to make the cover design vivid to match the film. So it's nice and eye-catching, but it's just a single CLV disc. Of course, letterboxed, but unfortunately doesn't have the AC3 track. So I'm hoping the transfer is really nice to kind of offset the not having AC3. Next up is another late release. This is the Warner Brothers release of the film Mad City, which is from 97. This disc was released in 1998, making it a late release. I've never seen this, but, you have 2 heavy hitters in the cast, and it's a nice late issue Warner Brothers widescreen pressing, so I figured why not. The other thing, this also has AC3 in addition to a Per-Logic encoded track, but what grabbed me most attention-wise is I didn't realize this was directed by Costa Gavras, who primarily is not known for doing big-budget studio films, so I'm interested to see this now, and hopefully it'll be slightly different than your average studio thriller of the late 90s. So again, I really know next to nothing about this. So it's just a single CLV disc, letterboxed with Per-Logic 2.0 and AC3, and of course, being a late release, is pressed and handled by Image. Jacket has a nice gloss to it, and it's not a super common disc, so very, very nice to pick this up. So I will definitely interested to check this out. I couldn't resist another late release. This is, of course, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, 97 film, 1998 disc pressing, another letterboxed Warner release. Really lovely cover art. I like the dusky orange especially, and you get the widescreen logo in the bottom corner, keeping it nice and classy looking. But of course, as usual, no gatefold, so there is a little bit of wear around the corners, which is, of course, to be expected. And I think since this is a late release, you don't come across these particularly that often. Again, it's not rare, but they were definitely amping up their DVD production. This is also handled by Image, so it is a late Warner disc. I've never actually physically seen a copy of this on LD before in person. I've seen it on eBay and some disc lots and stuff, but it never dawned on me that this is also technically a late laser release. Film is spread across 3 sides, no extras or anything, so you're just getting a nice letterbox presentation. And I haven't seen this in ages. Warner Archive just did a nice Blu-ray, which I was interested to pick up in one of their sales at some point, but this will tide me over till then, and I'll get to check out the AC3 track, which also, of course, includes a ProLogic stereo track on the digital track, so at least Warner wasn't cheaping out on their AC3 production. Here we have another 97 film on a late release 1998 pressing, this time from MGM. This is the film Red Corner, which, after looking at some of the imagery and reading some of the plot description, I feel like I've seen part of this on television before, but it'll be fun to watch. And again, if it's a late release LD, I'm going to watch it for sure. Of course, it's interesting to see that MGM changed up their usual late release black letterbox banner, and they went with this gray to match the film colors on the colors of the jacket, so I thought that was kind of nice. This is an AC3 pressing. There is a DTS variant out there, which is, of course, much rarer, much more valuable, but the DTS version will still share the same picture master as the standard AC3 release, as is the case with all the other MGM DTS pressings that I've come across. Of course, there's no gatefold, so it's just 2 discs shoved in a sleeve, which means it's prone to getting dinged up. But this one's in nice shape. Again, it's a later release, so you get the modern MGM Home Entertainment logo, and down here in the corner you can see this disc is pressed by Image, who pretty much started handling everybody's Laserdisc business for the last couple years. The film is spread over 3 sides. Side 3 includes a theatrical trailer, and there is a director's audio commentary on the analog tracks. So you have Dolby Surround PCM, AC3, and audio commentary, which again is pretty cool because most standard studio releases did not have commentaries. So yeah, I will check this out, look at the transfer, and I swear I've seen part of this film before because it seems familiar, but I don't ever think I saw the whole thing. And of course, if you find the DTS version, consider yourself lucky, because that's just a much more valuable copy due to the rarity. There's another 97 film, late release 98 pressing. This is 7 Years in Tibet, which of course is a Columbia Sony pressing. This one is known to have a bit of rot, so I have no idea what it's going to be like. It's just not a super common title, so 95 cents, I'm in. Also, no gatefold, so this cover is in really nice shape, in terms of not being dinged up or damaged. So again, for 95 cents, that's not bad either. It is a really nice striking cover. I do believe this is original poster imagery, but the orange and yellows and stuff admittedly kind of make it look more like a kid's movie in certain ways in terms of the packaging. But I do like the sort of motif that goes around the borders, and it's a nice enough jacket. One would just wish it was a gatefold. However, this is all made up for by the fact that the rear cover is far more distinctive for LD. You have the usual rather extensive tiny print Columbia, or I should say Sony, liner notes, which are really nice. I like the background, the image is chosen, and you get your chapter breakdown over here. The film is spread onto 3 sides. There is no trailer, there are no extras or special features. You do get a Dolby Surround digital track, and there is also an AC3 track, which there's a little blurb about Dolby Digital being, on the channel and having to be decoded down there, but the actual logo is actually hidden up here in the corner. And at first I wasn't sure if this was one where they skipped out on Dolby Digital, but sure enough, it's actually tucked away up here. So I will have to spin this up and check it for rot. Again, it seems like the rot history is kind of mixed. I think most copies of this do have some speckling probably somewhere. But again, I just don't know what this one's going to be like yet. But it was definitely a surprise, not something that usually pops up in the $1 or less bin for sure. And finally, to end this epic McKay's run of bargain LDs, we have a member of the super late release club. This from the film Bulworth, released in 1998. This disc was pressed and manufactured in 1999, which I would think puts it in the super late release club of the final calendar year of Laserdisc production in the United States. This is a release from Fox, letterboxed, has Dolby Surround digital track, and also an AC3 track, so thankfully they did not cheap out on giving us the AC3. Uses original poster art, and I have not seen this film in ages. I can't remember can't remember if we rented it at some point or more than likely saw it on cable. But it is one of the few Warren Beatty films of the past couple decades, really, because post Reds and Dick Tracy, really, his output has been extraordinarily sporadic. I remember liking it back in the day, but I will need to rewatch it because it's been an insanely long time. The rear jacket is actually a little bit on the plain side. It looks quite nice, but definitely, I'm sure this is probably used for the VHS and then the eventual DVD that probably came out rather concurrently with this Laserdisc. You still have the good old Fox special widescreen logo here. It's just a single CLV disc, and it does include the trailer, so that's at least something. I'll be interested to check out the transfer on here. I'm sure it'll be really great. I hope it'll be excellent. I hope I can add it to my list of top tier LD catalog titles in terms of picture quality. Sometimes you just never know. I've had late releases look great, and I've had late releases that only look like so-so, and you never quite know what the actual pressing is going to be like. And that's an element of risk that I always enjoy with a new LD that I haven't seen before, because you never quite know what the transfer is going to be like. So, hoping this one will turn out to be another real winner and a great late release. But it's definitely an uncommon disc, not rare, not worth a ton of money or anything, but it's from the final catalog year, so it's definitely not something you expect to see pop up for 95 cents. So it was a nice shock to find in the dollar bin at McKay's. So this is, again, we'll do it for this epic amount of dollar discs that I picked up, or I should say sub-dollar discs, because they were almost all practically 95 cents. So it's been a really interesting amount of titles to pop up, and I think it's unfortunately kind of run its course, but the original owner or whoever the person was trading them in was just bringing them in just segments. So like every couple days for the past few weeks, just like new super rare discs or interesting titles would pop up with a 95-cent sticker. And unfortunately, I think they've kind of caught on to the handful of us LD collectors, and now they're pricing them all higher. And it's like, oh man, you found our hiding place. So I think this is dried up for now, because usually at the store it's just like a little cubby hole in the back of the store with a couple discs in there for varying prices, and they kind of sit there for months or years getting kicked around, as most LD bins are, whether it's a record store or a bookstore or wherever it is. It's usually the same ones you've picked over a million times and you're just not interested in. So and every once in a while it gets interesting. So this one has been a real gold mine of nice finds, and a lot of these are titles I never thought I'd pick up or never thought I'd find, really. So and then a lot of complete blind buys, because again, simply minty LDs for less than $1. I think the real surprises were these late releases, the DTS titles especially, a couple Criterions, and then real surprises of a lot of late pressings, particularly the AC3 MGM titles, a lot of the Warner Brothers letterbox copies you don't see all the time. So some really nice, interesting finds, some worth quite a bit. So it's been a real pleasure being able to find some amazing finds in the wild here locally, which is very infrequent, but when it does happen, it's a really nice feeling. Well, that does it for this absolutely massive find from this collection that got turned into McKay's books. Again, I would have bought more if other collectors hadn't beat me to it. Again, they kind of saved me from myself, although I still bought a ton of LDs. I had to get some boxes just to store these while I sorted through them and did the video and stuff. So basically it filled up, two whole big, 12 by 14 boxes almost with all these. And I'm like, I'm already out of space. What am I doing? But they're 95 cents, man. I gotta get them. So yeah, these are titles I never expected to just see pop up. A few I could imagine. Some I really would have liked to have found, on LD for a while. They've been on my wish list, but then a lot of these, like I said, it was like Christmas morning pulling them off the shelf, and it's like, This has been on my wish list for 5 years. I've missed this on eBay. I've gotten outbid like 10 different auctions on this one. Or, here's the Warner letterbox copy, something I've tried to get for years. So finding those late release MGM AC3 titles was really something else. Like the AC3 Victor Victoria, especially the AC3 version of Brainstorm, which has the alternating aspect ratios. That's a super late released title, and very, very scarce. That's like usually like a $15 to $25 disc, if you even find one. And then some other really nice late titles, some Paramount hard to find discs, and the really cool Pioneer Special Editions, which they always look cool in photos and on eBay, and you see a picture of it, but until you have it in your hands, I mean, it's packaging to another level on the Boys from Brazil release and the Pioneer Special Edition of On Golden Pond, which I hadn't realized had a much more elaborate jacket until just holding it in my hands. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting seeing what turns up there. And I keep doubling back every once in a while to see what else has turned up. Again, some other collectors kind of beat me to a lot of things. And again, they saved my wallet for sure, because it's been really crazy what's turned up there. A friend of mine went in, found almost the entire run of the original series Star Trek discs for 95 cents each, found the Flash Gordon serial box sets from Image, just some really, really astounding finds. And they price everything, pretty much across the board at a flat rate. And so they're all about keeping the turnover coming of just materials coming in and out. So, you can go in there and you can do a heck of a lot of damage with $20, $10, or even $5. Again, seems like they may have caught on to some of us because there's like, 2 or 3 of us going in like, once or twice a week when this was going on, just because, holy crap, look at all these LDs for 95 cents. So they're like, hey, there must be something to this Laserdisc thing. But, it's also been kind of cool because they now kind of recognize all of us. It's like, hey, you're that other Laserdisc guy. Yeah. We don't know why you keep buying all these, but thank you for buying them all. So but I think between all of us, we've pretty much worked through everything. And yeah, it's really cool to see what turns up there because they price them super, super cheap. And so I've bought a number of things there, for a quarter even sometimes. And it's just been a pure curiosity buy simply because it is literally that cheap. And I know I'll never see a copy again for that cheap, whether it's a quarter or 95 cents or even sometimes, $2.95. And I did splurge a little on those 3 Criterions because, I was so excited to find the first pressing of Dr. Strangelove, and that, was well undervalued. It was at least half, if not less, of what less than half of what it goes for on eBay. And it's not like you can ask an eBay seller very easily, hey, can you tell me the mint marks on sides 3 and 4 of disc 2 of the CAV Dr. Strangelove Criterion Laserdisc? And they're like, what are you talking about? So I was able to check that in person in the store, and that was one of my big wish list titles finally crossed off. So I'm like, yes, I can pay $6 for this instead of paying 15 to 30 on eBay and having no real idea if it's a first printing or a second printing. But yeah, this does not really happen in this area all the time. It's every once in a while, very, very rarely, that a big collection comes through like this. So it's been really, really interesting. Again, it's a bunch of people walk by and you're like a kid on Christmas morning and everybody's like, what the heck is that guy looking at? What are these things? And I actually had people come up behind me and go, ask me what I was doing. And it's like, oh, well, these are laser discs because people think they're records usually. But people were actually interested because usually they just walk past the one little cubby hole. It's right up near the cash registers in the corner. And, you have to crouch down on the floor and not get stepped on because it's literally a cubby hole at the end of an aisle on the floor. But this one, they had to fill the whole cabinet. It's like 5 or 6 shelves stacked all the way up vertically. So it's like, 6.5 feet of nothing but laser power. So that was a really cool site to walk in and see. But so I had to split this up into a separate video. And again, I know it's quite long, but I had to go through all of these and I wanted to keep them together. So it was all the McKay's books haul of this particular collection. So hopefully you found some discs to add to your own wish list or add to your own collection, or maybe got reminded of some old favorites to pull off the shelf and spin up again. And always check your local stores, support your local stores, because you never know what's going to turn up. Every once in a while, even if things look dry, things like this can turn up where a whole massive collection comes in and you can cherry pick it and get some amazing deals. So I've got a second video coming up with the other discs, admittedly much less, but just when I think I'm curbing off my LD buying, it just, something like this happens, and it's like one of those things where it's just like, I got to do it. I got to do it. So I got all these LDs for like, less than $50 for the whole thing. So I definitely couldn't pass that up. But anyway, thanks so very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next installment of Laserdisc Updates.